Welcome to this 100th episode of 132 Problems Revisiting Mormon Polygamy. I am amazed. This is the 100th episode. It feels like a big deal. And just right at the new year, we crossed the 10,000 subscriber point, which blows me away. When I started this, I thought I'd be thrilled if it ever managed to get to 1,000 subscribers on this topic. And here we are at 100 episodes and over 10,000 subscribers and still climbing quickly. Speaking of, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and let's keep bumping it up. I think the reason that that feels gratifying is because it lets me know that these messages, this truth that I'm trying to share is resonating with people, and that feels so good to me. And also it makes us be taken a little more seriously, which I think is always a good thing. So these are exciting things that are happening, and I really wanted to have something special for my 100th episode. I had one idea I was working on, then another idea I was working on, and then this fell into my lap. I got into a conversation with Kimberly Smith, the great-great-granddaughter of Joseph and Emma Smith, who has both an amazing spirit and an amazing story, and also an amazing mission. And so I am so thankful that she agreed to come on and talk to me. This was her first ever public appearance other than in her firesides. And I think that you will, I hope that everybody loves this episode as much as I do. It is definitely worthy of the 100th episode. So I welcome you. I am glad you are here. I am so excited to introduce you to Kimberly Smith as we take this deep dive into the beautiful, beautiful topic of unity and love in the world and also in the restoration. Welcome to this episode of 132 Problems. I am so grateful and excited to be here with my guest today. This is Kimberly Smith, who I have interacted with a bit on Facebook, but only recently I had the privilege of hearing a little bit more of her story. And I'm so thankful that she was available and agreed to come on to talk to you. So the first thing I will say about Kimberly is she is a direct descendant of Joseph and Emma. She is, I just asked, the great-great-granddaughter of Joseph and Emma Smith, which is just incredible. And Kimberly, can I ask, are you from Joseph Smith III or Alexander? Where does your lineage go through?
Okay, so from Alexander, it goes down to my grandpa Arthur and my dad Joseph.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So your dad was also Joseph Smith, and
yeah, he's still living. Yeah.
Okay, your dad is also, I apologize, is Joseph Smith. That's beautiful.
Good.
And I had the opportunity to read a little bit of Kimberly's story. And do you go by Kimberly? Do you prefer Kim? Do you have a preference?
I really don't care. Most people call me Kim.
Okay, good. We'll do Kimberly. So anyway, it's just an incredible story. I know that Kimberly has spent maybe a couple of decades doing firesides and creating music and poetry to spread the gospel that she has embraced, that you've embraced. And would you mind just kind of starting out, telling us a little bit about your life and your conversion story? Just tell us who you are, where you come from a little bit, if that's all right.
Sure. So I was born in Maryville, Tennessee, 1962. We moved around a lot, so I lost my accent. But whenever I get back down south, I start talking that way again. As far as any kind of faith base that I had, it was mostly connected to my mother's, what I call Mountain Southern Gospel, which is an amazing foundation to have, because those mountain people believe strongly in always following the Holy Ghost. That's just hammered into you, when the Spirit's leading you, you go no matter what. So I learned from my mother that the Holy Ghost trumps everything. So it doesn't matter what other people are saying. And I had no idea till I was 12 that I was a descendant of Joseph, even though my dad's name was Joseph Smith, because we moved around so much. I wasn't around that side of the family, and Dad never talked about it. So it was actually because I was a huge fan of the Osmonds And I was one of those millions of girls that swore I was going to marry Donnie. And, it's their music was prevalent in my life at a time when I had experienced some severe abuse by a neighbor of ours. And it was them and the Carpenters and the Bee Gees. They all just became like healing type of music for me. And I kind of withdrew from the world for a while because I'd been performing with my father in bluegrass music. And I just thought that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. And
with bluegrass, were you the singer? Do you play? What?
Yeah,
a lot of instruments.
My son and I put out is kind of a bluegrass gospel type CD. And on my mama's side, Dolly Parton's my third cousin, so there's a lot of mountain influence in our music. And but back in those days, it was just me and my sister would sing with my dad.
Okay.
And I kind of pulled away from all that because I swore I'd never get up in front of anyone again because of what had happened to me. It crushed me so badly. And right about then, the Osmonds came out with their album called The Plan, which was a pop variation of The Plan of Salvation, but I had no idea what that was. I just know that when I listened to it, I could feel the spirit. And it was just very different from their other music because it was asking questions like, where did you come from? Why are you here? Where are you going when you leave this place? And my dad didn't like the Osmonds because their hair touched their collar and that made them hippies in his eyes. So, I just asked him one day why he didn't like them. And he said, because they're Mormon. And just the change in his countenance made me feel like that was a bad thing. So I learned very young to keep anything related to Mormons at a hand's length. You had distance. And a few months after I heard this album, we went to visit my grandma Smith, who lived in Ava, Missouri. And I walked in, and hanging on her wall was two portraits, one of a man and one of a woman. And the value of what my mom taught me about the Holy Ghost was if you get around people or things and the spirit is really, really strong, you need to learn as much as you can about those people and things because you're being led somewhere. And immediately they felt familiar to me, and there was just a love in my heart for these two individuals. So I went and asked my grandma who they were, and she said, that's Joseph and Emma Smith, your second great grandparents. They're the ones, he's the one who started the church. And she was referring to Church of Christ Temple Lot, which was an early breakoff of the original church. But they considered themselves the original church. And that's what my grandfather had joined after he left the RLDS, or Reorganized Church, which is now known as Community of Christ.
So was your grandfather born into the RLDS and raised in the RLDS, and he left to join the Temple Lot?
Yes.
Branch? Okay.
He was an apostle and a secretary in the Temple Lot Church.
Okay.
So that I had no idea what Grandma was talking about. I just needed to know I knew as much as I could about this man because I was being drawn toward him. And so this is where I began to bump into all of these things we're told. Because shortly after that, we moved to Ava, Missouri. So I was surrounded by all my dad's people, and I would hear these stories about Brigham Young supposedly having my great grandfather murdered. And if you're a descendant of Joseph and Emma and you go to Utah, you'll get killed because there's a conspiracy to wipe us all out. It's just a lot of crazy stuff that every time I heard it, it felt bad. And
okay, will you pause on that for a second? So the RLDS and the Temple Lot belief, because I know Brigham Young said that Emma believed that he killed Joseph. So that was, you guys were raised on that idea that Brigham Young killed Joseph Smith, and that going to Utah was, well, I just barely had a conversation with a friend where I said, for Emma, I imagine that her sons going on missions to Salt Lake had to feel like Mosiah with his sons going to the Lamanites, right? It was terrifying for her. So anyway, I just wanted to pause on that a little. That's what you were taught, is that was the history.
That's where the fear of going out west came from. And it was a real fear that Emma had, and it was based on things that were being said about her in the West and people from the West who would come to visit. And so those feelings were real to her. But I'm a historian, and I like to look at both sides of the coin. So when it comes to the question of Brigham Young having Joseph and Hiram murdered, in all the research I did, I never found anything that said that Emma believed that. I've never found anything. What I
good.
found, what I found was that William, Joseph's brother, wrote an article. I believe it was published in the WASP, and he accuses Willard Richards of poisoning Samuel, who died a few weeks after Joseph and Hiram were killed. And so, from that, that's all he said. From that, 4 generations down to me, it's morphed into Brigham Young had Joseph, Hiram, and Samuel killed. So I never believed and I'd never seen anything to convince me that Brigham Young was behind Joseph's death. So
okay. Thank you for pausing on that. I don't want to interrupt your story. I just think it's so interesting that that was the belief of your people. That was the belief. So, okay.
So all I knew is I needed to find out as much as I could about this man, and it caused me to bump into all of these things. And I learned whenever these things came up, there was such a conflict inside of me. And the more I prayed about it, the more the Lord was like, don't focus on that. Don't focus on that. Focus on this. You need to find out as much as you can about this man. And so I went through my grandfather's trunk. He had a lot of things that had been handed down in the family. And one was a little pamphlet that the Reorganized Church had published, I think in the early 1900s. And it's Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith tells his own history. And it's basically his conversion story. It's his story of the first vision. It's the first thing I had ever read that talked about it. And I knew as soon as I read it that it was true. And so that's all I really had to go on. And I was a teenager at the time. And so I just kind of put everything aside until I became an adult and I was married and got interested in family history, genealogy. I had been so fascinated with so many historical figures in history, and here I was related to one, and that was kind of fascinating to me. Who else am I related to? So I was just kind of digging like that, and it introduced me to going to the Family History Center for the first time, and that's when I found out about Nauvoo, and I was pulled to go to Nauvoo, and it's just all these little stair steps led me eventually to Nauvoo. And what was fascinating to me was all of those historical figures I had been so obsessed with were my grandparents straight back, some of them kings and queens of England, Ireland, Scotland. It's like, okay, man, there's a connection that we have with our ancestors for sure. But I still was very intimidated by being around LDS people because of the things I'd been told. But every time I was around LDS people, the Holy Ghost was the strongest I'd ever felt it. So at length, I had to concede that that's where I needed to go to find out more about my history. And so that's.
So when did I miss? Did you tell me when you were around LDS people? Was it in studying family history?
Yeah, in 1986, after going to the Family History Center a few times, I just felt compelled to go there. And I took my son and my daughter, and we went for the first time to Nauvoo, and not really being aware of my history. I had so many feelings and emotions walking on the homestead. I was just at a point where I broke down crying by the graves. And all I knew at the time that it just felt very heavy and something felt unsettled. And I just knew I needed to know more. So as I stayed there and went through the different homes and spent time with the missionaries, I'd get outside and think, man, my dad said they're so good in hooking you. If you're not careful, you get snookered. And I knew I'd get snookered at the drop of a hat because I just want to be everybody's friend. But I'd go through these tours in these homes, and the Holy Ghost was just so strong. And every witness I got was, stay the course. You're going in the right direction. You need to learn from these people. And so that's kind of what I did. I went back and forth for several years to Nauvoo, which was like a half a day's drive. And we lived close to Branson, Missouri, which about like was an hour away from where we lived at the time in Ava. And the Osmonds had their theater there, and I got a chance to go one night. And during, just before intermission, Merrill Osmond came out, and he was singing How Great Thou Art. And the Spirit was like, you need to meet this man. Well, by then I was so used to listening to the Spirit. I was like, okay, I don't know what this is about, because to me, it's like nothing ever made sense, but it made sense later if I followed through. And so after the show, all the brothers would usually come out and visit with the people. And so I met all the brothers, except Meryl didn't come out. And so I waited until everybody was pretty well gone. And I told the kids we better go because they're going to start cleaning up. So I was walking up the aisle and I heard someone behind me, and it was Meryl. And so I turned around, and I walked up to him and introduced myself, and something was saying, tell him who you are. And we had been taught never to tell anybody. And so I was just like fighting it. It was just so strong. And I said, I've seen your My Beliefs page and how much you love Joseph Smith. And he said, oh, you remember the church? And I said, no. And I said, I just wanted you to know he's my great-great-grandfather. And he said, oh, I need to talk to you. And the reason he needed to talk to me was before he had come to Branson, he had a vision in which Joseph took him into a building, and there was a room that was sectioned off by a curtain. And Joseph pulled the curtain back, and Meryl said he saw a sea of faces and they were all miserable. And Joseph said, this is my posterity. Would you please help them? So that's how I got to know Meryl, and we visited off and on. And little by little, I began to feel that I could trust them. If I wanted to investigate the church and take the lessons, that I could trust them to deal honestly with me, because it was just hard. When generations have been teaching, you stay away from that, and that wall is put up. So it was kind of scary, but I took the discussions in his home with the sisters. And during the third discussion, I was given.
So you took the discussions in Meryl Osmond's home. You took the discussions with Meryl Osmond. Okay, this is an amazing story. Okay.
What's so fun is his mom. I loved his mom and dad so much, but his mom and I had so many laughs about the things I had been told. One of which was, if you're a woman and you try to leave the church, they take you up to the top of the Salt Lake Temple and push you into the Salt Lake. And me, being geographically challenged at the time, thought the lake was right up against the temple.
Yeah, that'd be a big throw.
And so she had a good chuckle every now and then. I would tell her a lot of stuff that I'd been told, and she would talk to me about it and clarify things. And so it was during the third discussion that the Spirit was like, you need to be baptized. And right after the meeting, I just told the sisters, I said, I know I'm supposed to be baptized. And then there's this moment of, I had an hour's drive home, and all the things caved in on me. Like, okay, what about baptism of the dead? What about polygamy? What about Brigham Young? All these things I've been told. And it was a horrendous ride. And I got home and I laid down on the bed, and the first thing that came to my mind was the Holy Ghost trumps everything. So I had to push all of that aside. And I was baptized June 7th, 1998. Meryl came up to our ward on a Sunday and baptized me on a Sunday morning. So it's a very short version. I left a lot out, but basically the whole journey was about following the Spirit, because especially polygamy, because you just don't even say it in my dad's family. It's the P word. It's a dirty word. And you don't say it because it just brings up so much ire. And every time I bumped into that on that journey, I felt horrible inside. Like I would get ill inside. There would be all of this turmoil and conflict. And I don't like conflict. I don't like contention. And every time I prayed about it, I always got the same answer. The Lord would say, put that behind you. That wasn't your experience. That was the people's of the past. If mistakes were made, they're on the other side of the veil. They've reconciled those mistakes. It's not right for it to be carried on and to cause discord. And I was like, okay, I can live with that. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can I ask? So did you, when your grandmother told you about Joseph and Emma, her grandparents, I guess, did she say anything about polygamy? Had you been taught in your heritage that polygamy was Joseph or that it was Brigham? And I assume...
we had been taught that it was something there's the belief that he was sealed. He was in the act of sealing the human family together in Nauvoo, and that polygamy evolved as a result of Brigham Young, not Joseph Smith. That's what my dad's family believed, that Brigham Young had basically, that he believed it and that it was supposed to happen, and he had to, and this is my family's words, he had to construct the revelation on it when he introduced it to the people to give it credibility, because he didn't feel like it would be acceptable to them unless it came from Joseph. So that's what my dad really believed. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And so, yeah, continue with your experience with the spirit and polygamy, like, because joining the church, that was like you had, I guess, many of Brigham's false doctrines to have to overcome. I don't know if blood atonement and Adam God theory and, played into your perspective, or if it was just polygamy was the big focus, or if there were other things that you struggled with.
A quote that I like by Albert Schweitzer, and I'll have to read it because it's the greatest discovery of any generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering the attitude of their minds. And so when it came to a lot of those controversial doctrines that would fly in my face sometimes, I had to learn to think that way. I had to learn to change how I thought. And I always went back on the answers I would get when I would pray about it. And that was always, put that behind you, because it's not here right now. Your focus is supposed to be on your role in the gospel today. And so that's all that became my mindset was, so there's a spiritual side of me and there's a historian.
Yeah. Okay.
Historian is the one. I love it when people dig in and into history mysteries and try to figure out why and how something happened and fill in gaps and puzzles. I think that's natural and okay for people to do. Then there's the spiritual side of me, which is like, I have to be cautious, and I think other people should be cautious of where they let their emotions from the findings take them, and to make sure the findings are absolutely accurate, because these are people who aren't here to defend themselves. These are people we will have to face again someday. We are measured by how we think about other people and how we talk about other people by God, and will be held accountable. And so I'm very, very cautious. Like, this is the first time ever in my 20 plus years of being in the church that I have publicly talked about this in this depth, because I don't want people to think I'm an advocate for one side or the other, because I'm not. What I'm an advocate for is peace, fullness of joy, the Savior, the gospel. That's what I'm.
Unity and love.
Yeah, and unity, especially unity. And this is what bothers me about both sides of the polygamy issue, is that it gets to a point where it's causing discord and it's causing division. It's causing people to lose their testimonies. And you could bring me any kind of document that's 100% proof that somebody in the past did something against Joseph Smith, and that person was in a leadership position, and it proved beyond a doubt that they did. I still would not leave the church if the Holy Ghost has told me to be here, because that's what I have to follow. I can't follow man, and I can't follow things like that. I have to go with spirit.
That's okay. So in our conversation, that's one of the things I just loved about you, because it felt, I don't know, I don't want to claim too much, but Kimberly and I did have a conversation, and I felt like I was talking to a sister. It just was so beautiful to talk to you. Because that is exactly me. I like whatever struggles, like the question is, what does God want you to do? Where does God want you, right? Where can you be of the most, what is in your highest good, your family's highest good, and the world's highest good? Where does God want you planted? And that's where you go, period. And we have to learn to follow the Spirit. I just adore that. I have two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is, what was your family and community's reaction when you were taking the discussions, when you decided to be baptized? What did your parents, did you have children already at that point? Yeah. Would you mind talking about that?
So I was married at the time. Had two children. I believe Brian, my son, was 10 and my daughter was 7. Nobody knew that I was taking the discussions. I kept it a secret. Nobody knew that I got baptized. The only person that knew was my son. He was the only one in the family who was there. And at the time, you had to have your husband's permission. That kind of slipped slipped through the cracks somehow, which is interesting because there was an urgency with this. I was terrified of people finding out because I felt like someone put a stop to it, and I knew it's something that I was supposed to do. And so I let a couple of months go by, and the first person I told was my mom. And she just said to me, well, was it the spirit that led you there? I said, yes. And she said, well, you've done the right thing. What are you going to tell your dad? I said, well, I thought I'd send him an email because I don't want to talk to him. And so I did. I wrote out a long email and explained everything. And he was very, very hurt. We've always had a good relationship. He never cut me off or anything like that. He thinks I'm going to hell, but he doesn't cut me off, and he still loves me. But it did cause a lot of problems that were already there in my marriage, and my husband was very against the church. So.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry to ask a personal question. That's a painful experience. I appreciate you sharing.
No, you're fine.
And I neglected to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, because I'm hoping it's the spirit that inspired you to do so, because I loved our conversation and I felt so good about it. And I think your story is not only profound and beautiful and compelling, but also so important for our day as we go forward. And you talk about some of the experiences you've had and some of the things you feel you're called to, that I think will really resonate with many of us and be important messages. So my other question, well, maybe do you want to continue with your story? Did you have more things? Maybe you'll get to it. I wanted to ask what your feelings were toward Brigham Young and other early church leaders and how you worked through that, unless you were planning to come to that at a different point in your story.
My feelings for Brigham Young when I was baptized were like, I'm not somebody who hates easy. I've never hated anyone, but I did hate him because of the things that we were told. And so the first time I went into Relief Society, which would have been like the next Sunday, because we had to leave early that first Sunday, I walked in and someone handed me the manual that they were studying for the time, and guess who was on the front of it? It's just like
the presidents of the church, Brigham Young. I'll bet that's what it was. Yep.
I couldn't believe it. She handed it to me. There was Brigham Young. It was like, and I said, thank you. Yeah. And she turned around to sit down, and I walked out the door and swore I wouldn't go back till they were done with that book. Go to Sacrament, but not Relief Society. And so that's what I did. And after a time, it was time for me to go to the temple, and I was talking to different people about what their favorite temple was, because we lived in the St. Louis district. But for some reason, I felt like I was supposed to go somewhere else. So, okay, I have no idea about the temples, so I'm going to ask different people what they think. And I'd get told, San Diego and Hawaii and just all these different ones. And then one day this woman said Manti. And as soon as she said Manti, it just clicked. I said, okay, that's where I want to go. Where is it? She said, it's in Manti, Utah. I was like, oh, I can't go to Utah. That's a scary place. I was still like, weirded out by some of the stuff I'd been told. But I knew I was supposed to go. And like two days, I believe, before we left, I was taking missionaries home from their zone conference. And Elder Woods, who's sitting in the front seat, and I was driving. And he said, I hear you're going to be in Utah for like 6 weeks. And I said, yeah, I'm going to meet some family that I've never met before and get my endowments. And he said, are you going to learn all about Brigham Young? And that my hands just tightened around the steering wheel. And he was the type of missionary that when the Lord worked with him, his countenance would change. He got really, really quiet. And I looked over and I went, oh, man, now the Lord's working with him. That means I got to listen. So I asked him what was on his mind, and he bore his testimony of the Savior. And then he bore his testimony of Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. And by the time he was done, my defenses were just all down. And I came to a signal light that turned red. And I put on the brakes, and everything I ever felt against this man was taken away. And it was so overpowering, I had to take in a breath. And then the light turned green. And we went on. And when I dropped the missionaries off, I said, you know what? I told them what had happened. I said, there's a big empty space where all this hatred was. You bet. I'll learn as much as I can about Brigham Young. And so while we were going around the temple area, we came to his grave, and I asked everybody for a few moments, and I just catch up with them. And I got down on my knees, and I said to him, I asked him to forgive me for perpetuating the hatred against his name. And then I said, I forgive you too, because you said and did things you shouldn't have, because there were things said and done on both sides of the fence that caused the problem. And I heard a choir sing Near My God to Thee, and it was very audible to me. And I was given to know through the Spirit that everything our ancestors experienced together, even the pain they may have caused one another, they experienced those things, not us. They're on the other side. They've reconciled those things. It's wrong for us to carry it on. And that's the kind of message I'd been getting the whole time when I would bump into conflicts and stuff like that. So
we don't need to carry the grudges and feel the anger and resentment of the past that's not our own. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, it's okay to research and find this out, but be careful where your emotions take you. That it's not turning from, people may find out things here and there in history that they feel like they've been lied to or betrayed. That's happened in every church organization I've ever heard of. There's not a church that hasn't had that in its past. But our challenge from the Lord is, what do we do with that? I mean, because we have control, and anger and betrayal goes down a one-way street. And at one point, if we don't do something with it, the adversary will, and it's going to go either one side to love and forgiveness, or it's going to go to the other side to bitterness and hatred. And what we choose, the direction that we choose, will determine who we are and how we become. And
I love that.
In the Lord's eyes, that's why it's so easy for me, because a lot of people are like, you should be the most upset because they found what they think is a lot of evidence against this or that. Because you're a descendant of Joseph, that's your people, And I'm just like, number one, I don't really need to know that for my salvation. And number two, I'm not angry at anyone, because if mistakes have been made, then, it's being reconciled. If they're being taught on the other side, who am I to get angry at them and stay angry at them if they're learning what the truth really is now? And so it's like, I just can't. I can't become angry. I have to be loving. I have to be forgiving. Why? Because the Savior on the cross looked down on those people who put him up there in the immense pain he was in, them standing by his own mother and his family. And he asked Heavenly Father to forgive them. And if he can do that under that kind of pain and the magnitude of pain it must have been, then who am I not to forgive people for something that they've done to my ancestors, right? So it's like,
oh, absolutely. What I love so much about how you express this and the experiences you've had is that it's not, I think people get confused and think that somehow if we're not angry at someone, it means they didn't do anything wrong. Right? Like that it's either they did this, or if I say we don't need to be angry, well, then you're saying that no problems happened. And that honestly is how I get accused often of hating Brigham Young, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Like I tell people, I have a son named Brigham because I didn't know, I can't hate my son's namesake, but even more, I just feel like we can view it, and I like to say this is, I can do my best to put myself in someone's shoes and go, this seems to be their character. This seems to be what they were doing. And it's okay to talk about it. And it wasn't good. And it was very, very bad. Right. But we don't need to be hateful or accusing or angry. We can just look at it honestly as historians and without having the emotion tied up in it. And anyway, I think I am curious about your feelings of Brigham Young that needed to be healed, because I do feel like we carry things for our ancestors, and I kind of want to know how those developed, because if you were raised really not knowing anything about the church, so was it while you were investigating? Like, can you tell me how that hatred developed?
I have such a a close connection with Joseph, which isn't odd. I'm his great-great-granddaughter, so that's not so odd in a family relationship that you would feel attached to one or another ancestor of yours. As a matter of fact, it's been proven through DNA studies that emotions, experiences of ancestors are passed down through the DNA. So I've had several experiences where I know that's true because it's happened to me. And so when you have that kind of in-depth connection with someone, that kind of love, and you hear that this other person did this, and that to them, and me being a young kid, at the time, before I understood what a fullness of joy is and what the pure love of Christ is, it naturally just bounced over to bitterness and hatred, and so it was basically, just those kind of feelings that.
What kinds of things did you hear? What kinds of things were you told? Because I would think it'd be more about Emma. Like I've so often, I didn't know Brigham had done as much to Joseph as kind of Brigham's treatment of Emma. That's been a hard one for me to fully understand.
Basically, because the way it was put to us that he had Joseph murdered, he stole the church away, he took it out west and corrupted it. That's a lot for a kid to hear and handle. When they're viewing in their heart their great-great-grandfather through that image I saw on the wall, and all I could see there was pure love, and just to hear my dad, the way he would talk about it would bolster that, build it up. So, but it was so out of character for me too, because I'd been taught by a mother who knew the pure love of Christ like no one. And so it was a conflict in me because that's not a part of my nature. And so that's why whenever I was working on my book, Rising Hills and Sinking Valleys, it took me 15 years to write it, because I would get in depth to these correspondences of between the sons of Joseph, the sons of Hiram, where the debate would get really heated. And they always ended it with, in the bonds of familial love type wording, but you could feel the ire in the words that were going back and forth, and it would become too much. Like it would hurt. It would hurt too much, and it would make me sick, and I would have to put it aside. And so that's why I learned I needed to find a way to process all of that and get it out, or it would be a residue that would just sit with me, and the adversary would use that against me one day if I didn't do something with it. And so it was that experience riding with the missionaries and by Brigham Young's grave where I was able to let go of all of that. And it's funny because I have a really good friend, Chad Orton, and he wrote a book called 40 Ways to Look at Brigham Young. And he was visiting Nauvoo at the time, and and we were living there. And he gave me this book. He said, I just had to give you this book. He thought it was a good chuckle because he knew I had to deal with Brigham Young years before. And so I thanked him for it, and I put it up on the bookshelf because I was really busy, didn't have time to read a new book yet. I'd flipped through and I'd seen pictures of him before. There was one where he was sitting in a chair, and he looked so stern. I was like, isn't there ever a picture of Brigham Young where he's smiling? He just always looks so stern. Well, I took a nap on the couch that day, and I had one of those realistic dreams that you have sometimes you want to write down. And we were in this brilliant white room, and there was a big banquet going on, a long white table, and a lot of Latter-day Saint peoples from the past were there. And I was there with my family, and my son was there. And it kind of opens up with me saying to my son, I'm going to go ask him, because Brigham Young was sitting at the end of this long banquet table with his elbow up on it. And my son said, Mom, you can't talk to him. Papa won't ever talk to you again. He's talking about my dad. If you say anything to Brigham Young. And I said, I know, but I've got to know. So I went, I sat beside him, and he turned and looked at me, and his cheeks were blushed, and he smiled the biggest smile. And it was so beautiful. And I said, Brigham, I want to ask you a question. You knew Joseph more than anybody did. does my son really look like him? That was my question. And because my son does look like a lot like him, but just then, and my son has a very loud, carrying voice. He's very jolly. And just then, Brian threw his head back and started laughing really loud because he was talking to somebody. And Brigham chuckled and he said, yes, he does. And then he took my arm and he said, but my dear, you are more like him than anyone I know. And I was like, and I woke up and I went and found that book and I was breezing through it again. And there was a picture I hadn't seen before. It was Brigham Young and a round table. He had his arm up on it, just like he did on the other table. And he was smiling in that picture. And I was like, well, so it was really good for me to have that dream because I got to see him because this all seemed like after, we're in the afterlife time, we're all together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice to see that visual in front of me. I'd already dealt with everything. I'd already overcome the stuff, but it was a good visual, and I'm a visual person. But yeah.
Yeah, okay, that story is so good for me to hear because I think it is when dealing with this topic like polygamy, you just tend to be in the hard stuff, right? The hard things that Brigham said, the unfortunate teaching. There was just so much that's just hard. And so, but never is a person's character just one side or the other, right? And so it's so important for us to, like the worst person has their good moments and their good days, and the best person has their bad moments and their bad days. And it is so good to have. I'm so glad you shared that because that gives me, I like the thought of Brigham wanting to do better and having learned and wanting to make amends and being able to go and give Brigham a hug. I like that thought and I like that image. And so I'm glad that you're bringing that to me because I haven't felt hatred and I haven't felt, I haven't had the generational trauma in the same way that you had with Joseph and Emma, but I definitely have had kind of a, I've just been so troubled by so much of what he did. And so the idea that he could smile and be loving to you as Joseph's daughter, as Joseph's great granddaughter is just, that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it.
He loved Joseph. He loved Joseph. I know that he loved Joseph. And he wasn't very tactful sometimes in how he approached things and talked about them. I understand that he needed to express his frustrations about Emma, but he could have chosen different wording. And that, I'm a big advocate for telling people, I know you need to say what you need to say, just find a different way to say it, And
well, one thing I've thought about Brigham is that it sort of is unfortunate to have a huge platform and total power. Who knows what that would do to any of us, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know in my life, there have been so many times that I've needed to be corrected or, and those feelings of humiliation when you got it wrong. And, it's like so important for us to, or I've been saying something and someone corrected me or someone called me on exaggerating or, there was no one. Brigham had established it so that he didn't have the benefit of any of that. He had a complete, a free platform to say whatever he was going to say. And there was no one there to keep him honest, sort of, or I don't think that I think that his situation outsized his negative characteristics. Can I say it that way? Do you know what I mean? I think there are a lot of people who maybe would be much worse than Brigham if they had that same amount of power and influence with not being checked for that many decades and bad ideas that had been planted, right? And so anyway, so I think that's one way that's helped me a little bit is like, oh, I'm glad I wasn't in that situation.
Yeah. It's, when you consider what was at stake at the time, that is a lot to carry. I'm trying to recall what story this is, but I remember Brigham Young saying something. He was talking about something to somebody and he really kind of let loose, and then pulled himself together. And it was in front of a crowd and he got up again and said, before you heard from Brigham Young,
that was
now you're going to hear from
carts.
The prophet. Yes. So it's like I think there were those times where he caught himself and, but it would just be so hard. I have no guile at all against Brigham Young. One of the things that I love the most that the Lord showed me is, one was an analogy, and it was about a ship. And I looked at the church as this big ship. But there's a lot of other ships that's going to the same place our ship's going, but our ship has the most furniture in it, is the truth. And so you want to stay on that ship. But people are bumping into all these stains. There's stains on the floor, and there shouldn't be, I'm not going to jump ship because there's stains on the floor, because I know the Lord's going to come back one day and he'll help, he'll take care of those stains. I don't want to jump ship and go to another ship they all have stains on them. Do you see what I'm saying? That's kind of that's one thing that he was showing. The other one was the example of Peter. And this is what I think about when people talk about this or that person made mistakes and stuff, is that Peter denied Christ 3 times. And to me, that's like the biggest mistake someone could make. It's huge. But, all of the disciples struggled after the crucifixion, but they processed it all. They came back together, and the Lord didn't throw them under the bus. He didn't pull them out from being the rock that the church was built on. They came back together, and they overcame those things, and together finished building the foundation of the church. And so that's, I guess that's why when I hear a lot of things, and I do bump into a lot of different things, I just try not to be judgmental, because the Lord is so forgiving. And the Lord knows more than I do about these situations, because I wasn't there, to see it all unfold. You know how it is when you hear a rumor about somebody today, and on social media, everybody just kind of believes everything that's out there. And then when the truth finally comes out, it's so different than what was put out there. So it's just like, that's why I'm so cautious about, delving in to anything and letting my emotions go away with it. So focus on the gospel.
Okay, I have to clarify a little bit, because when you say, what I always say is we take a deep dive, So when you're saying delving in, can you just describe a little more what you mean?
Delving in, yeah, I guess I should have added more adjectives with it. Just be careful in delving in, not to let the attachments do anything to you, like not to let attachments get onto you and cause this residue and bitterness to build up. I think for everybody to understand how and why things happened. History is so important to us to understand, and we need to understand it with clarity and understand what really happened, no matter what kind of history we're talking about. But it's not being able to put it behind you that's the most cause of the problems in the Mideast today. They're still fighting about things from generations ago, right? And so it's that inability to put things behind you and not let it attach. That gets in trouble.
So maybe be able, as we delve in, as we delve into our history, do so with a prayer of charity, recognizing that without charity, you're nothing, right? And charity is what this whole life is about. So please help me to be able to feel love, feel unity, feel compassion and understanding for as I study these difficult things. I guess I needed to, a lot of people say, why are you opening that can of worms? Why, like, that doesn't have anything to do with us anymore. And I think you're saying a very different thing. What they're saying is stay ignorant, right? Don't get the information, don't be informed. And what I'm hearing you saying is get the information and be informed, but stay centered in peace and love and charity. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel led to delve in, I don't see anything wrong with that. I had so many people ask me, why did you study the lives of Governor Ford and Thomas Sharp? And I said, I wanted to understand what made them the way they were, for one thing. And then I wanted to, and it's very, very, very sad what kind of lives they had after Joseph's death. And I had compassion for them. And it's one of my goals to put flowers on their graves one day, because I've forgiven them for that. And I think they need that. They need to know that from at least me and other descendants, that, we're not holding on to that, because they're all over there and they understand everything now, and they understand what they've done wrong. And for someone like Ford and Sharp, that's a pretty heavy weight to have to carry. So I think part of their release comes from our being able to release our hard feelings against them. And so
I love that.
Yeah.
So carrying those hard feelings does not serve us, does not help make the world a peaceful place. And it's sort of a gift that we can give ourselves, the world, and both our ancestors and those who were hard on our ancestors, right? Who caused our, like, it's just in every way the right approach. It just does pure good. And not doing it is a really big missed opportunity. I love hearing how God healed your heart and how you've been able to
and
I
think
forward.
I think I mentioned to you, I call it the hamster wheel. Did I mention that to you the other day when we talked? That I think the adversary has a hamster wheel, and that's the he likes for us to get on that hamster wheel of delving in the past, but staying there. And
Offense.
staying there, and because some of these things we won't get 100% answers for. There's just some of them we won't. And getting entangled in that tool, that just consumes your every thought, because he does not want us focused on the gospel today and our role in it. And so we're living in a time, the times are changing so fast. Like, it used to be over decades it was changing. Now it's like in the last 4 years, the monumental changes that's been happening. And our focus needs to be on what's coming and how are we going to deal with that. Are we staying aligned with Christ so that we can deal with these changes that are coming? That's what our focus needs to be. I'm not saying it's not okay.
Absolutely.
It's researching, it is, but I'm just like, don't let it consume you. Don't get on that hamster wheel where you're being taken away.
Or don't get turned away from God. And like, let our studies turn us to God, not away, right? In everything. I want to, so you, if I'm understanding correctly, you were baptized in the church, still with a hard heart toward Brigham at the time that you were baptized.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that was healed, but that sounded like I was accusing you. I'm not at all. It's very understandable. I think a lot of people feel that now. But and then also not believing, like you believed that Brigham had all of these problems, or did things that were wrong before you were baptized, and yet made the choice to be baptized because that's where God directed you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, because like I said, it's about following the Holy Ghost. And, if mistakes were made, I can't help that. I wasn't there and I didn't know that person. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
go ahead.
The reason I'm asking is because so many people who either grew up in the church or were baptized into the LDS church, then they find out these things. They find out some of the things that Brigham Young said and that he did, and that they find out more about polygamy, and they think they have to leave the church. And so that's one of the spaces I'm trying to be, is like, we can be in this church while having our eyes open to false traditions, which is exactly what the Book of Mormon warns us of, right? So I wanted to draw attention to that, because that's something that's important to me, is to help people understand that I think we're raised in such a paradigm of the prophets cannot do anything wrong, that it really shakes people up to learn, wait, the prophets did something wrong, right? So I just wanted to kind of draw attention to that and how you look at that. You're just saying it's about Jesus Christ, so whatever one leader did is kind of irrelevant. It's about the Lord and you.
Yeah, really. I mean, I've moved all over the place all my life, but like ever since joining the church, I've lived in several different places. So I've been in a lot of different wards. I've bumped into people who are in leadership that did things they shouldn't have been doing. And some of them in high leadership. And it's just like, they're on their journey too, and they're learning. So I can't cast them out for making mistakes and misjudgments and going down the wrong path, because, hopefully they'll get pulled back on the right path. And I want to be there for them when that happens. And I kind of equate it with, if you're going to school for higher learning and you find out that several of the teachers are corrupt, I wouldn't leave that school. I would stay in the school so I could continue to gain my knowledge. That I think that's the best way I can put it, because I can't help it if other people are making mistakes. And I'm not saying that I'm the scholar that knows every little thing that peoples of the past did. I'm just saying, if mistakes were made, that's between, them and the Lord to reconcile. And for us, we have that challenge of, can you just process this and forgive them because they were human, they made a mistake, and you stay on your journey.
Okay, so charting your journey thus far, so you were called to the church through all of these amazing experiences, then you were called to join, and then you were healed from your feelings of hard-heartedness, of pain, right? And
Right.
then you came to Utah, and I didn't even realize Brigham was buried at the Manti Temple. That's where his grave is. I guess I should have known that.
I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. We were going around the Salt Lake Temple.
Oh, okay. I thought he was buried in Salt Lake. Okay, so you came. All right, thank you for clarifying that, so I didn't get confused. And so then, can you tell us more of your journey? Because it sounds like you have felt called to do certain things, called to works. I want to know where you went from there.
I have had several what I call revelatory dreams, where things were kind of laid out that I would be doing. And a lot of it just involves, like the firesides that I do, the content is, a lot of it's my conversion, and then also why Emma stayed, and some of the things she stayed in Nauvoo, and some of the things that she endured after Joseph's death. But it's all. Pardon?
Would you mind filling us in on some of that, some of what you share in studying Emma? Was one of the highlights for me. And so what would you mind sharing some of your insights about Emma, your great-great-grandmother?
Did you know she was left-handed?
I did not know that. Okay, there's the first thing we know.
She was left-handed. She had a pretty quick wit. I don't know if you know the story about the pastries that she would make. Did you know that story?
No, tell us, please.
So she made pastries. She loved making twisted donuts, and so she'd keep twisted donuts for the grandkids all the time. And so the last time her birthday celebration, me and some friends went with twisted donuts to eat them by her grave. So that's how we celebrated it. But she had this one little round pastry that she would make. It was kind of like a puffed pastry, and she couldn't stand politicians because they were always coming and taking up Joseph's time. So you know how politicians are. And this one politician would just consume all of these puff pastries. And he said, "I really love these puff pastries." He said, "What do you call them?" And she said, "Candidates," all puffed up and full of hair.
So good.
But there's a really good book called Reflections of Emma that have some of these stories in it. And there are things that were recorded in her grandchildren's journal that they observed about their grandma. And I have so much admiration for her because of the way that she held herself high amidst all of the different things that were being said about her, and people coming from the West and reporting back. And you have to take in consideration the people that were coming and visiting Emma, they were taking everything at face value. And they didn't understand that when people from the West would come, Emma's defenses would go up because she didn't trust anybody. And so if they even got close to talking about personal matters, she'd just put this wall up, and she'd say, "Well, that's personal," and she wouldn't talk to them. Sometimes she wouldn't see people. So these reports would get carried back to the West, to Brigham Young, that Emma wouldn't see us, or Emma was very cold to us. And of course that would grow. And he's getting this picture of Emma according to what he's being told from people. So you can see how that that plays into things. He's getting a perspective. I had someone tell me not long ago, if when they were older, if they could have just sat down and talked with one another about what this one heard on this side and this one heard on that side. And so there were a lot of things like that going on, the talking back and forth and the perspectives that were being carried out west and carried to the Midwest. And like I said, she was at a point where she didn't trust anybody. And that's actually where she was when Joseph died, because from the time of Kirtland, if you think of the Kirtland time period, this was a period where they had been rejected by society. So anybody who came into the church as a member, they became like family. It was a bonded trust that they had because society was rejecting them. So they were very close knit. And then when you had those very close knit members of the family turning against you and swearing out affidavits against your husband, that trust is broken. And I'm sure that was devastating for her. And she was close to many of the women who went to Missouri ahead of her. And then by the time she gets to Missouri, some of those women and their families have been excommunicated. They swore out affidavits against Joseph. They're part of the persecution process. And so this happens a lot over and over again. And then the government and how they were treated by the government. So you can understand by the time they're in Nauvoo how she doesn't trust anyone but her husband. And then now in 1844, he's gone. And so at that moment, she goes into survival mode, and she feels like no one's going to take care of her but herself. And that's why she went to file to be administrator of the estate, because Joseph had not left a will, and it was a mess that took 10 years to settle. And she wasn't able to do that because you had to have money to pay for there was a fee with becoming the administrator, and she didn't have the money. And so there were just things like that happened throughout the process after her death, that his death, that she was constantly trying to survive. And it was really, really hard because they were left destitute. So this estate took 10 years to settle. There's a really good article by Dallin H. Oaks called Joseph Smith and this
Steamboat.
Yeah. Oh, it's full of so much history, and how the church got into the debt with the U.S. government because of the sale of a boat from Robert E. Lee to church members. Anyway, that became like a huge part of that estate settlement. But it took 10 years, and
that's why Joseph was in bankruptcy court, and
right.
He was in bankruptcy court when Emma died. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
I'm going into that a lot because I'm doing an episode on the deeds, because people use the deeds to try to claim that they're evidence of polygamy. And so anyway, so that's why I'm delving into it. But yes, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, I don't know if it's come out yet, but I know Joseph Smith Papers was doing a volume on that included the estate issue, because they've bumped into other documents that they didn't have when Dallin H. Oaks wrote his article. So I think it's going to have new information about the estate issue. But it was really hard because when all was said and done, she did get, I think, about $1,800, which was a lot back then, but she had to use that to pay off the taxes on her homes. And she was even left with some of the church debt. She
settled with a lot of debt. My understanding is that Joseph III was still working on the debts well into his adulthood. The letter from Emma to Joseph III
I think it was up to 6 years before she died, before she was able to pay everything off. But she did. She did it. She was so well thought of in that town. And I love what her stepson, Charlie Bideman, said about her, that she was a woman of queenly bearing without the arrogance of being a queen. And I love that description of her. And I don't know if you know the story of Charlie or not, but if you've seen Emma Smith, My Story, it starts out with the story of him. And what's beautiful about Emma's heart is that she not only forgave her husband and the woman for having the affair, she asked them on her deathbed to get married after she was gone and make it right. And, what woman today would do that kind of thing?
Mhm.
And
And while she was living, she brought her into her home to, like your husband's mistress.
yeah,
You bring her into your home so she can be near their baby, right? And one thing I have to, I know we talked about this in our call, but one thing that just hurts my heart is that I've heard that used so many times as kind of like Emma finally learned her lesson about polygamy. She finally learned to be okay with polygamy because of, they use the vitamin story with, is it Nancy Abercrombie? Is that her name? Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but that is so frustrating to me. And first of all, as I said to you, first of all, that acknowledges the truth that polygamy is the same as adultery, right? If they're saying Emma learned to live with adultery, just like she needed to learn to live with polygamy, it's acknowledging that they are actually the same thing. It also is so demeaning of Emma, where like she needed to learn her lesson, where it's like, no, the situation with with Vitamin reveals her character. It reveals what her character always was, right? A woman who had been jealous of her husband having other wives as an older woman would be even more upset and more jealous, right? That you can't make that kind of a dramatic shift from how they claim Emma was to what we know of her life, what we know who she was.
Yeah, I haven't read the documents that talk about this is where they use Emma. I haven't, to stand up for their side of I haven't read those, so I really can't comment on that. But what I can say is that I know it's just an example of Emma's heart and who she was. She had a huge love for children. She, when Nancy approached her to take in Charlie because she couldn't afford to take care of him anymore, Emma's heart was broken to see a mother and a child separated. So she hired her as a housekeeper so she could be with her son. And that's the sign of a pure love of Christ right there. And that's all that was. She had always been very obedient to God. She had always been a very compassionate woman, especially when it came to children. And she took in kids. You can find people living with her, young people living with her in the census reports years and years and years later. She was always taking in people who needed to be cared for.
And she had done that her whole life too, because like the stories that Lucy told of the house being so, she was always taking care of the sick, always bringing in the newcomers. And Lucy talking about Joseph throwing down his coat and laying down on it, and Emma laying in his arm, and that's where they would sleep for the night because they had people in every single bed in the home, right? And isn't that what she always did? And I guess the thing that's so striking about the Charlie Vitamin story is that, like think about that. You've been cheated on before, according to our stories. Like Joseph broke her heart constantly, is what the polygamist story is. And then her second husband, she finds out he's also having an affair. Because she didn't want to see that, she brings that woman into her home where she would not only be around her son, but around her husband, right? Like that is the most extreme example of lack of jealousy that I can begin to imagine. I don't think most of us can imagine doing that. And yet that's what she did, because that's who she was. And so it just makes it impossible, the stories that were told about her being the stories that William Clayton and Brigham Young and others told about her. So thank you for telling us a little bit about Emma. I know you've talked a lot about how Joseph kind of has your heart, and it really is Emma that has been a minister to me, that has Emma's who I feel like I know. So that's beautiful.
I love the stories that Joseph Smith III writes about when the Native Americans would come over with Chief Keokuk. And it's through Chief Keokuk's wife that Emma gets a lot of her knowledge from medicinal herbs from. And of course, she shared some with her as well. And so it's just this nice little glimpse we don't always get. And he talked about the games they would play and how fascinated he was with the tomahawk throwing. And, it's just a fun read because we get to see a human side of the family. And it's just she gave a lot to that community and became one of the most beloved citizens. I know when she died, she had thousands of people who came through and viewed her body as well. So,
Wow. Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing those insights. So, tell me, what other things you want to share with us? Like, would you mind sharing some more about kind of what you've been called to do with your firesides, and sort of you told me some beautiful stories about feeling called to unify and to help bring
yeah,
peace together.
yeah, like the overall tone of my fireside, I do talk about Emma, I talk about my conversion, but the central theme is aligning yourself with the Savior, the gathering of Israel, and unity, and the pure love of Christ. Those are the main components, and I just tell how those things have affected my life, and how I've been pulled towards those things throughout my journey. And it's because I know what a fullness of joy feels like. I want other people to feel that too. And I'm not saying other people don't feel that, but I don't like seeing all the conflict and the discord and the division. And those are things that have come up in several of my dreams, and where Joseph was trying to teach the people, and they'd all come together, and then he would go for a while, and then within a short amount of time, they'd all be divided again, and he would just keep having to come back. And it's just this whole idea of how can we expect to be a people that can be gathered when we can't even, agree to disagree agreeably, is what I call it. And, be a united people despite our differences. And that's the biggest message is this challenge that we've been given is like those first two greatest commandments, the second being love your neighbor. That's, I think, the one that's most challenging for us. It's been given to us to try and master that challenge. And that means we have to learn how to be able to be a united people despite our differences. And that's why I do the firesides. That's why I talk about the importance of finding a balance and all of these things we have to. It's hard. It's so hard today in these times. It's not just about polygamy on one side or the other. It's about, gender changes and all of these controversial things that we're faced with today. And how can we be a united people with people who think so differently than what we do? How can we be united under Christ? And that's where the full, the pure love of Christ comes. It's all about how much we love one another, and what we do with that love, and not letting bitterness and anger get in there. The frustration, I think, is okay. I mean, it's normal. It's normal to become angry. Actually, it's normal to be frustrated. That's frustrated. It's like I said before. It's what you do with that that determines who you are and how you become. And that's
you don't have to respond when you're frustrated. Like, I know I do much better when someone makes a really hurtful comment or accuses me or gives me a really unfair, harsh criticism. I do better if I can just take a minute and then, and then either not respond, or when I feel like I can respond and say, hey, that's good feedback, or I see it this way, when I can respond with, just like you said, without the emotion, without the hooks. And so I wanted you to talk a little about how you think, because we do have these political divides and morality divides. And I mean, we are in a really, really divisive time. And so it isn't like, first of all, with the issue of, say, polygamy, what I struggle with is people in the church that are like, you can't be one of us if you say that, like if you say that out loud, you can't be here. And that I struggle with, because I don't tell anyone they have to agree with me. And so it's hard for me to be told, you're going to be, we want you kicked out. We don't want you with us. That's a hard thing to hear.
Yeah.
So I think disagreement is not only fine, it's inevitable. It's baked in. Yeah. It's just a matter of how we, can we let people be among us who don't think the same thing that we think, and who are willing to say that they don't think the same thing we think? Why anyway, I guess I want to hear some of your insights about how we do that, how we have that unity in these difficult times, and then maybe I'll share a couple of my thoughts, if that's all right.
You know, it's interesting because while I was living in Nauvoo over the summer, there was a huge dispute about the new visitor center that's being built there. And it's caused a lot of division amongst the church members and between themselves and between the regular citizens that live there too. You know, everybody as a whole were just kind of divided on this, and it became very heated. And somebody said to me once, "What do you think Joseph would do?" I was like, I hate these questions. I said, well, you know, knowing Joseph, he would have gone out of his way not to cause any problems with his neighbors and built it at a different spot if that was going to make peace, unless that's where the Lord to put it. And they said, well, surely you have an opinion. I said, yeah, I don't have an opinion. I said, I don't. And I kind of think back, someone had made the comment that, you know, Jesus didn't have a problem telling people off when he needed to. And I'm like, I don't look at it that way. There's a lot of times when I look at the scriptures and he's in the midst of some kind of turmoil and somebody asks him this question, like one of the Pharisees or something, like expecting him to say something that will cause a big debate, you know. And he always shared a parable that they could learn from, you know. And so when it comes to things like that in the political environment, and it's so heated and crazy right now, I always look to the scriptures because where we're going is where we're going. We're on a slippery slope now. It's going where it's going, and I really don't think there's a way to stop it. But I think there's a way to process it, and that's through the scriptures. You know, we've been told about these times in several books of the Bible: Isaiah, Ezekiel, Ephesians, there's Daniel. There's all these different scriptures that talk about the times we live in, and we're given instruction through those scriptures on how to handle it. And it all is geared towards being aligned with the Savior, being aligned with our Heavenly Father and the Holy Ghost. And so I've made it part of my regimen not to do anything that would take me out of that alignment. And so I've learned not to become offended. And that's why I was telling, I hope you don't mind if I ask, you know, the question. I just I never get offended, and I don't, because I know where that leads. And so I learned a long time ago to stop being offended. But it is hard. It's hard to get to that point, especially today. And I would not want to be a kid growing up today. And I've worked in the school system. I quit last year, and it's so hard for them right now. And so I think we adults, we've at least got some years of study and knowledge behind us to be able to kind of handle these things as adults. But these kids, that's what I worry about, is the generation growing up right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And being raised almost in this this time of what I consider to be like basic truths. They're being taught to not believe basic foundational truths. And then also division is being nurtured. It's almost like the more offense you can take, the more moral you are, right? And so it is hard. And I was looking up, I was trying to find, I think it's Daniel 11. I love when Jesus, and I might be getting my scriptures wrong, so my producer might have to fix them on the screen for me, but I believe it's in Matthew 24 where Jesus says, let him who readeth understand. He's talking about the last days. And that, I think, cross-references to Daniel, where it says they have understanding. It's talking about the last days. And they have understanding, do many wonderful works. And, you know, it's really the people who become the people of God in that time are the people of understanding. So Jesus is saying, when you see all of this chaos happening, be in this group of people who understand. And I think what that means is exactly what you're talking about. It's those who understand what we're called to do, which isn't to fight the battle and win the battle necessarily. It's to be peacemakers, right? To be charitable, to like I love that you brought up Jesus, because what occurred to me is he was so familiar with the scriptures and so inspired that he was able to sort of like play above them, right? They were playing checkers and trying to catch him, and he would make some 3D chess move that they had no answer to, right? That happened again and again, even whether it was with a parable, or sometimes it was like when they were saying, whose son is David? And he said, you know, he would have a scripture that would be so far above them, it would stump them. And I find, like, I guess what I'm thinking is, oh, if I want to say something divisive or proving my point or argumentative, maybe I need to take another example of Jesus and be more inspired and more wise and spend more time in my scripture so that I can say something that's above the game that is being played right here, right? Do you get what I'm saying? Like to try to bring things to a higher level that will just silence the debate, or at least not drag me into it. And so, and then another thing that I have found helpful to me, and I can share, you know, it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to always do it. I sure try, but I sure don't always succeed. But one thing I try to do is when I see a person, it's so easy to see them as a representative of their group, especially if it's a group that I disapprove of, right? Or that I disagree with. And if I can instead see them as a beloved child of God and not worry about the group, not put all of the weight of everything I disagree with about them on them, but just see the child of God, like praying, God, help me to see them through your eyes, right? And then I can deal with that person, human to human, child of God to child of God, without the issues having to be the first thing that, right? And so that's been a helpful strategy for me to try to adopt the best. I mean, it is hard. It is hard.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you want to share some of the experiences you had where you felt called to that? I loved some of the dreams you shared with me of how you saw.
Yeah, I'll share the one of the, there was the one, I won't tell the whole thing, but the one where Joseph came and taught the people, and that because they were in discord, they kept coming back. In that one, I would stay back and not go with him because I didn't like contention.
So the people were contending.
Yes.
And Joseph would go to the contending people and teach them, and they'd be peaceful when he taught them. Is that right? And then
they would be all united, and he would leave again. And the third time that he came back, he took me with him.
So when he would leave again, they would be in discord again. Like as soon as he would leave, they would start contending.
Right. And he took me with him the third time, and I was there while he taught the people. And then when he left, and they were all fine again, and he left. As he left, his ring that he was wearing slipped off into my hand, and I kind of closed my fist over it and held it to my heart. And I woke up, and I was just given to know when I asked what that meant, that, you know, I have a responsibility to carry on that attempt to keep the people united, and, you know, to teach truths, especially, you know, the very basic truths that come from the Savior, and to adhere to that second greatest commandment. Because if we can't get that second greatest commandment right, nothing else that we do matters, because that's what that means at the end of it, where it says all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. And so that's why my focus is so on unity. And that dream taught me specifically that it's not just my responsibility, it's anyone who knows what that means, to have that balance of loving one another, should be out there teaching other people what's at stake, if we don't create that balance, and what it takes to create that balance. And so that's one of the experiences. But the one I love the most that I told you about was the where I was walking up a hill, and there was an old man and woman who lived up there that I just loved so much, and I loved doing anything for them. And as I'm passing by their barn, there was a young man who had put up a lean-to, and it had a sign that said, we'll work for food. And so I felt sorry for him, but I also felt kind of afraid because I didn't know who he was. So I went up and knocked on the door, and no one answered. And I opened the door, and all the rooms were sectioned off by curtains. And the woman came out, and I said, there's a man down by your barn. And she said, yes, I know. And she said, he's fine. And I said, okay. Well, the man came out and called all his sons to him and said he had something for them to do. And I rushed forward ahead of them, and I said, oh, please, can you let me do it? And he just thought for a moment. He said, okay, I have several hundred pounds of hay that needs to be gathered in the field tonight. And he gave me a pitchfork. So I'm like, okay. And, I get out the door and I was like, oh, what have I done? As it was just like, how am I going to do this? And I'm walking down the hill, wondering how I'm going to accomplish such a huge task with such a simple tool. And I get down to the bottom of the hill, and there's a curtain drawn across the field, and it's just stubble. And I pulled the curtain back, and the whole field was stubble. So I ran back up, and the man was gone. The lean-to had fallen over, and I ran back up the hill, opened the door, and the man was laying on a cot, and he was wounded and bleeding all over, and the woman was tending his wounds. And I said, is he going to be okay? And she said, yeah, he'll be fine. And I woke up knowing that I had an immediate answer what it meant, and that had been the Savior who was wounded on the bed, and that I was the simple tool. And that the message that I got from that was, even if you don't think you're adequate or have what it takes, or you don't feel the self-worth to accomplish something that you've been led to do, if you go forward with the intention of doing it, you'll get there and find the Savior's done most of the work already. And that happened right before I started doing firesides, because I was terrified of doing the firesides. I had kind of closed myself off all of those years because of what had happened to me when I was little, and to get up in front of a crowd was very terrifying to me. And I had so many doubts about myself, and that dream is the one that I've always looked back to tell me that it doesn't matter how simple you think you are, go with the intention of doing what you've been called to do, and the Lord will help you along the way. And so that's my favorite one.
That is so beautiful and so profound. I love it. And it makes me, I guess I don't want people to watch this episode and think, oh, wow, she has a profound calling, or, like I've shared what sort of my calling is right now. I strongly believe that we all have callings, right? That every single one of us, the second we ask, Lord, how can I help? What can I do? And if we ask it with an honest, sincere heart, not trying to build up our own king, like I once heard, I think it was Sherry Dew actually say something that I loved. She said, be careful of people who are building their own kingdom instead of God's kingdom, right? And people can think, but I like that. So if we ask with a sincere servant's heart, Lord, am I here to help? What can I do? I really believe that we are given our little. It might not feel like very much, and you might not feel like you're very capable of it, and yet I love that so much. Just take the next step, just go ahead, and the Savior will have done most of it for us, or at least open the way.
Well, and just start walking that way, because I think a lot of times when we halt because we don't feel like we're capable, then the doors don't open that would have made it capable. But I think when the Lord sees us walking that way, even though we doubt ourselves, he starts opening those doors. And I think he waits to see if we're willing to walk that way before those doors. So that's certainly what I've found anyway. And I know there's it takes everybody doing specific things. Some people have responsibilities that are huge. Some people have responsibilities that aren't that big, but are very necessary. And I liken it to the parts of an airplane. President Uchtdorf would love me right now for saying this. That,
you would.
If you know the workings of an airplane, it takes the hydraulics to make those wings work, and you can't fly a plane without wings. And so those big parts are necessary. But even if that one little screw gets fractured, then the whole plane's going to come apart. So it takes everybody doing things in all sectors to bring the people together and to teach the gospel and the pure love of Christ and unity. Yep.
Oh, I love it. So I'm thinking Jesus taught it through the body of Christ, and you and President Uchtdorf teach it through the airplane of Christ, right? It's the same principle of each of us doing our part. Another, I do want it, because I just had a talk with a friend who's was kind of saying, I felt like I was supposed to do this, but I just don't feel like I'm accomplishing it. And I can't. I think another thing to recognize is how unendingly patient the Lord is, and how often answers or direction come earlier than we're ready for it, or than the door. I knew, like I have a large family. I have 13 children, and I knew long ago that I had work to do, and I always struggled, because how can I do what I feel called to do while I'm also being called to have children, right? And it just took patience until the Lord was like, okay, now's the time. And so all of those years that I felt like I wasn't living up to what I was being told, or I think that it's also a matter of sometimes just planting seeds and just saying, Lord, I'm here when you need me. And, being called to care for our family, provide for a family, take care of children, or take care of a elderly parent. Those are all part of it. It's not separate from that. So because even if it might even just be a question of, Lord, can you show me how you're using me, or how I'm an instrument if my life feels maybe busy but mundane, right? I think I don't want people to struggle to feel. It's just peace and patience is what we're after, not like relentless striving. Anyway.
Yeah. We want to become like our Father in heaven that way, and be patient and understanding, more than anything, empathetic for sure. To always be putting ourselves in other people's places, and I think that helps us understand what they're going through, then that makes us more patient. So that's why when it comes to Emma, I try to tell people, don't look at her as a prophet's wife, because that makes you think of her way up here. Look at her as a human being and a mother, and look at everything she's gone through, and put yourself in her place and ask yourself, could you have handled it? And so there's a lot to be said for being empathetic, especially in these times. So
that's beautiful. And actually, that's a way that we can prepare to be better instruments in the hands of the Lord, right? Like we can spend some time really learning empathy, unity, trying to engage in that unifying way. That's so beautiful.
I think that there's a lot of mindset with some people that, and not just in our church, just all across the board, where they think they have to fix what they think is broken in society, and what our kids are being taught about on different platforms these days. And I think, what it is that we need to understand these are young children that are being taught certain things, from a young age. I used to wonder, why is it going to take 1,000 years for the Lord to reteach everybody? Why? And now I'm starting to understand it's going to take 1,000 years to break up the mindset that's been formed just over the last 100 years, and a few generations of living that mindset for it to set into stone before the end of that millennial reign. It'll take that long to fix this. So
wow, that's kind of okay. That's kind of discouraging. Yeah, but I'll just I can. Do you know what I mean? It's like
I think that
it's just so hard.
Yeah, I just think knowing that kind of helps me to so I don't need to worry about. I don't need to focus on. I need to fix this. I need to
just being patient.
Yeah, I need to focus on. Okay, what are they going through that they're being like this? What's made them this way? How can I help them balance that out? How can I be their friend, and how can I show them the pure love of Christ? And at that point, if you're showing them the pure love of Christ and to the fullness, then the Lord will take over and do the rest. And it'll be up to that person to be receptive to that too. It's contingent upon that, but that's what we can do.
I love that. So yeah, we can listen without judgment, and we can love and understand. Oh, okay, I want to understand your journey that I don't understand, rather than I want to judge you and tell you that you're wrong.
Exactly.
That, okay, that's beautiful. Okay, tell me if people are, so what are your plans now? I know that you are kind of in a transition period where you aren't teaching and aren't working in the school. So what do you feel called to, or hope that you will do in this next chapter of your life?
So I started out by spending the summer in Nauvoo, and I spoke to a lot of different tour groups that came through, and did some tours. I like taking people to the out of the way places of Nauvoo, like Joseph's Farm, and telling some of the stories they don't know about. And other than that, I'm picking up on doing firesides more frequently. Like we did a lot of firesides up until 2015, and then only did them in the summers. And so I'm going back to doing firesides again. And so whatever opens up, I'll just go. I'll just go and do.
Okay, so I have to say, Kimberly invited me to come to Nauvoo. I'm sure she invites all of us to come to Nauvoo, right? And so I am doing my best to arrange that. And what I guess I hope is that maybe we could share that more broadly, you showing all of us around Nauvoo if I'm able to come.
Yeah.
So I would love that. So I will say I'm going to try my best to arrange that. And I think we can do it. I think we'll be able to do it. I would love to be in Nauvoo maybe in the springtime. And then also what would be beautiful is if we could also maybe have you give a seminar while we're there, a fireside that we could also share. That would be just beautiful, and take people on for the ride. If people do want to reach out and invite you to do a fireside, how does that work? Do you travel? Do people pay your travel expenses? Do you just do them locally? Because I think people might want to have some firesides.
So we used to drive all over the place. So I can't drive everywhere. Like I can't drive in the mountains. So I have to have someone help me drive. But now, and we've never charged for a fireside. It's something that was made known to me from the very beginning, because this is my testimony as well. And I'm not going to charge money for something that was freely given to me. But we do have to get there, so we do ask for travel expenses and a place to stay, usually with members, or that way no one's spending money on a hotel. And so, but yeah, they can. My email address is ldsgenerations@gmail.com, and they can just email me if they're interested. So, yeah.
That's perfect. So maybe we could trade. I can come out to Nauvoo, and then we can have you come out here and do a fireside.
Yeah.
In Utah as well. So, or many. I'm guessing there might be many. So,
we lived in Payson for about 3 years, and we were doing 2 or 3 a week for a while.
Okay.
But we're going to be back in August. We'll be back that way for the Joseph Smith senior family reunion. So I'll be setting up some. If people want, I'm going to be there. If you want me, let me know.
Okay. That's wonderful. Okay, well, we'll have to set some up right now, even before I release this. So, I can have the first claim. Okay. Is there anything that we have? I could just talk to you forever. I just have to say how much I have loved and appreciated interacting with you, getting to know you, and getting to talk to you. I hope that people are able to feel what I'm able to feel of your spirit and the connection and just the pure desire for goodness and unity and following where the Lord leads you. It is just a gift to be able to interact with you. So tell me if there's anything else that you would like to talk about that we've not touched on.
That we haven't touched chocolate.
Oh, okay, let's talk chocolate. Well, I will, before we go to chocolate, I will link below your blog and your book and your music. I think it would be really fun to let people hear that. And so the most important question of chocolate, dark or milk or
Dark.
white?
Dark.
Okay, I knew we were soul sisters. I just knew it.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah.
yeah.
So the blog is not up to date. I haven't put anything up there since June, but I will be soon. And because my schedule's crazy, and my book, Rising Hills and Sinking Valleys. So that and the music's on my website. But I also have a couple of books I've released on Amazon under Kimberly Joe Smith. So you can look me up on there too. There's some books on that one.
I'll have all the links below, and I'm having a friend help me set up Amazon affiliate links. So if you are interested and you wouldn't mind going through those, that would help me out a little bit if you're going to buy them anyway. But are there any other Emma stories you would like to share on the way out? Well, you told us the book, and I'll have that linked below. I can't believe I didn't read Reflections on Emma. She was funny and smart and spunky, like you said, like her politician, her candidate donuts. And I loved the letter that she wrote to Joseph. Was it when he was in Liberty Jail?
Yeah, that's in my book after where she talks about the rising hills and sinking valleys. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I love that she says, I give my respect to anyone there that you respect. Do you know, you can just sense her, like her spunkiness and her strength. And
she had a very high soprano voice that is said to have been beautiful. She loved to sing. And the whole family, it's one thing that I've noticed when in doing genealogy, the genetics of the talents has all been in the arts and teaching. And so there's musical art and just like art in general, but music seems to be really prevalent in the family. So she and Joseph loved to sing together. Their children all wrote hymns. Some of the hymns that David Hiram Smith and Joseph Smith III wrote are still in the Community of Christ hymn books. And my grandfather was musical. My dad was in bluegrass music. So it's just been a kind of a prevalent thing that's kind of gone down through the lines.
I love it. I love it. Well, you've given us so much to consider. I hope people will really, all of us, consider what we are trying to bring into this world. And I do think the ultimate way of standing as a witness of Christ or standing for truth is in the way you are talking about, through love and charity and peace and understanding, as well as truth. But truth is better delivered through love than it is through aggression.
Even if it's painful truth and something you may not want to hear, I think it's better to be transparent and address them honestly, So
Yes, I think so. Well, Kimberly, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and talking to us. I think you have blessed all of our lives, and I'm really excited to come out there. So I am going to make that happen, and it'll be.
Anybody that wants to, just let me know. I'll try my best to be there and show you around.
Perfect. Okay.
I've loved this. This is great.
Well, thank you. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.
So this is actually a day or two after we initially recorded. I had been, after Kimberly and I initially spoke, I had been feeling really bad that there were some things that I had forgot to say and bring up that I'd wanted to. So I was so happy when at 5 o'clock this morning, my time, I was awake and I got a text from Kimberly asking if we could record again. I was like, yay. I had reached out. We were trying to come up with the title for the episode, and I had reached out with some suggestions to Kimberly. And I think, well, you tell from your side what why you wanted to record.
I got your message, and I was like, well, why don't we, because I think you suggested something had Brigham Young's name in it.
I suggested Forgiving Brigham as a possible title.
I was like, oh, that's kind of, because there's been like this effort for between the Smiths and the Young family associations to mend those fences, and I didn't want to reopen, old wounds or anything like that. So
anything that sounded accusing.
Yeah, okay. And I didn't want to, because quite honestly, I've seen the things but I just don't, like I said, my focus is on the here and now. And like I said, I don't believe Joseph started polygamy or practiced it, but at the same time, I don't have enough information to make any decisions about Brigham Young on anything. And it's just like, I don't feel like that's something I need to spend my time doing. So I think I kind of, in our last talk, the thing was, if there were mistakes made, I've forgiven all that stuff. I put it behind me because that's what the Lord told me to do. And so I thought, what would a better title be? And while I was thinking about it, this memory came up about a letter that had been written from the Young Association to the Smith family. I was like, oh my gosh, instead of when she said, do you have anything else to add? Why did I say chocolate? Why didn't I think of this letter with Brigham Young? Because it's just like the very core message I was trying to get across, and the act of the Smith and the Young families coming together in a reconciliation moment was a process of what I was talking about. This is what we need to do. We need to reconcile our feelings. And so that's what prompted me to send you a message and say, hey, can we just do like a little more? And so, yeah, that's how it started.
So thank you. And yeah, you said that did it wake you up or keep you up? You just kept having
I couldn't go to sleep.
Impression.
And it wasn't just that. There were a few other things that the Lord was like, you need to say this. You need to say this. And I had like 3, maybe 4 hours of sleep last night because my head just would not shut up. And so I went into writer mode and it said, think about your historical fiction you're working on. How do you want this chapter to go?
Yeah.
I thought maybe I would fall asleep while I was thinking about it, but it would just like bounce right back to that. And it was a rough night. But
okay. Well, I'm glad we're doing this again, and I'm really excited to hear what you want to share. And then I had some additional things that I had wanted to ask you about as well. So actually, do you want to go ahead and go first, since we've already introduced what you want to talk about? And then.
Okay. Yeah. So I think in 1999 is when I first went to a Joseph Smith Jr. family reunion. And so I started going to all of them every year. And in 2007, my cousin Mike Kennedy, who's the president of the organization, was prepping for the coming reunion, like what kind of things can be the theme and all that stuff. And he was prompted to approach the Brigham Young Family Association and ask them to write a letter of apology to the Smith descendants to help ease ill feelings that still existed. And I spoke about some of those feelings, like some of the things that we were raised on. And
so can I ask you, like those feelings you expressed of just, even though you've never hated anybody, hating Brigham Young, that was more, is that kind of all of the Smith descendants tended to feel that way? Now, I know you can't speak for all of them, but was that a common sentiment that many people share? I kind of wanted you to speak to the pain.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, they call it the P word, and if you said it, I mean, faces changed like drastically. And, I in my later years, I made comments to my aunts and to my dad sometimes, is it wise to hate somebody that way? And even though I felt the same way, but I struggled with it. And my dad would be like, well, I don't hate Brigham Young. And I'm just like, wait a minute. Because for me, I look at language and how we talk to one another and how we treat another, language and action. And those things can convey hate without saying hate. And the language they were using to me definitely wasn't coming from love. So if it's not coming from love, it's coming from the other place. But they were angry. I remember my grandfather writing a letter, or he's writing in his journal, and he talked about a time when he was growing up in Independence, and he was in the reorganized church. And he was out on the playground with other kids, and a lot of them were from the reorganized church as well. And he got beat up badly. And by some of them weren't members of the church. And one of the non-members called him a Mormon, and he didn't like the way it sounded because it attached to, how did he put it? He said he never forgot that day. and how much he hated being called a Mormon for the stain of polygamy that Brigham Young had put upon his family. And that's how he wrote it. And he described it as a stain and just his anguish. Yeah, you could tell. Now, my grandpa wasn't somebody who hated people. He was somebody who would try to work amongst individuals and resolve things. But that was a very distinct area of pain for him that he recorded in his journal. So yeah, it was pretty deep set.
Okay. And so your grandfather, Joseph Smith Jr., was his grandfather, right? So it hit close to home to have like I remember a quote from Emma saying that Brigham had made all of the lies that anyone ever told about her husband true, like validated all of those lies. And so your descendants feel like, well, like you expressed in the first one, Brigham, they thought, killed Joseph, stole his church, and then accused him, gave him the bad reputation of polygamy, which he never did. So if I'm understanding correctly. So, okay, that's a lot of pain. Yeah.
Yeah, so keep in mind, I'm expressing things that they felt.
Yeah.
But you can see where he's coming from. You can see that this is my grandfather. And of course, the things he knew about his grandfather and what a great man he was, and the man who he was spiritually and in history, and the things that he had done, and the connection he would have felt to that.
And he would have been very close to Emma because Alexander's children were always at Emma's home. So he would have also had, learned about who his grandfather was more from his grandmother as well, and felt a close bond with her, I would think.
Yeah, well, he was born the year after she died.
Oh, okay. So he didn't have the connection to
but
it.
He would have heard about it like more than any of us do through reading. He would have known her through the other grandchildren that knew her well.
Who all knew her.
And his father and his father, my great grandfather was amazing. He had a saying that said, if you want a good time, take it with you. And it's just something we all live by. That's why we're all like always being silly and laughing and having humor. That's why I have Grover on my, we want everyone to be happy and have fun. So that's the kind of sentiment that was in that family. But yeah,
why don't you go ahead and on that funny note, why don't you show us your mug that you showed me after we finished recording? Do you want to? Kimberly was so worried that she'd have this mug, and I was like, we can't read it, but it's funny.
Let me just say that I think that Joseph Smith would be the first person to laugh at this. So yes, you have to know how to laugh about things. So I was on eBay. Every now and then I look on eBay to see if people have outdated, unprinted books that are out of print about Joseph or about the history. And then I found this colonial style beer mug that says Joseph Smith, Ye Old Stone Beer Brewery. And I was like, isn't that fun? And it's located in Sheffield, England. So no, not our Joseph Smith, but there was a man named Joseph Smith that had a beer brewery. And so whenever people come over and they see that sitting on my desk, it's like a topic of conversation.
That's so fun. And actually, Brigham out here did have a distillery and I believe a brewery and a winery. He settled southern Utah so that they could create their own wine and grow their own cotton. So it's fun to know the history. Yeah. Okay, thanks for showing us that.
Yeah.
So anyway, continue. Yeah.
So my cousin Mike proposed about this letter, and he was invited to bring it up at the forthcoming Brigham Young Association board meeting. And when he did, the question came up, well, why do we need to write a letter of an apology? And it's then that, Mike and my cousin Gracia were just like, they have no idea. And here came the discussions of the way the descendants had been taught about Brigham Young and the way those teachings manifested and grew from one generation to the next into these narratives. And they were dumbfounded. They had no idea. And it's interesting because, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So Mike, your cousin, felt like if the Brigham Young Association will issue a letter of apology, that can help my family start to heal, was his hope, if I'm understanding correctly. And then the Brigham Young Association was like, what are you talking about? What did Brigham do that was wrong? That, am I understanding that correctly?
Right.
Just
Yeah.
the
It's like,
lack of
what's this
understanding
all
of both
about?
sides.
Yeah. And so it was Mary Ellen Elgren, who was a descendant of Brigham Young, was approached with this task. So she did a lot of research and she found out, kind of the history of the things that we had been told and what we grew up believing. And from that, understood why we felt the way that we did. And, it's just like we've had to come to an understanding of why they feel or felt, or some still feel, about Emma the way that they do. And it's been this ongoing effort to try to put out there who Emma really was, and to clarify some of these things. And so it was happening on both sides of the fence, and she was just blown away by the whole thing. And what wound up happening is she wrote a letter after praying for a long, long time, days, about how to do this, because she understood the weight of responsibility and how it needed to be done carefully.
So
And it became
the responsibility to both sides, like it was
to
such
both
a
sides,
delicate.
to both sides, because
Okay, and
this is like the epitome of what Christ is saying is when he says, lay your differences aside and come together. These are the kind of things that have to happen, regardless of what's happened in the past. It needs to be put behind and processed. It's got to be processed, but find a way to process that, put it behind you, and come together, because that's the only way we can be a united people under Christ. And so that's this is part of that happening. And it's actually addressed in the dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple by Joseph. And I'll share that with you in a minute. But she winds up writing a letter of reconciliation instead of apology. And go ahead. I think you're just trying to say something.
I just love this story. I love everybody involved. Like, props to, I just feel God's hand working with people. Mike having this responsibility. He wasn't saying you have to apologize. He was saying, what could help us? What could help my cousins heal? Oh, this could. Like, he had the best of intentions. And then Mary Ellen, instead of just getting offended or saying, how dare you say, was willing to dive in with a humble heart and really understand the pain. And this is a beautiful story of God working through the hearts of beautiful people. I love this story.
I think, the people in the Brigham Young Association, I think they felt really crushed that this had been going on for so long, and they had no idea. And Mike is amazing. That was a huge responsibility, and in his heart, he knew he needed to try and make this happen, because it had just been going on for so long. And I could offer my side of things, because I sit on this side of the fence of the line of Smiths through my grandpa's side, and the Missouri descendants are the hardest to reach. They have the thickest, tallest wall. And so I was speaking back and forth with my cousin Gracia after I was baptized about how I was raised and everything like that. So they had an understanding of just how hard it was going to be. We had people who would not go to these reunions, and specifically because they were in Utah and they were being organized by members of the church. And he was just trying to find a way to say, hey, we're not trying to get you to join our church. We want you to come together as a family. Come and know your cousins. Come and realize we don't have horns and all these crazy things. You've heard about us. Just come. And they made that happen in 2005. And a lot of Hiram descendants provided the income for those who couldn't afford to come, and provided housing. If they would just commit to come, they would pay their whole way and take care of them. So we had a lot of non-member descendants.
So you mean the Utah Hiram descendants, Joseph F., like the Mormon, okay. Joseph F. Smiths, and okay.
Yeah, and it was just great. Beautiful. So now there are several descendants who come to the reunions all the time, and they don't have this expectation of being bombarded with pressure of joining the church or anything like that, but they've come together as a family. And I just have to tell you really quick, that 2005 reunion, my mom and sister were both there, and they weren't members at the time. And there were several other non-members with us. And this is when the youth was doing their 200th celebration of, was it Joseph's birthday? I think
Probably.
it was. Remember when the youth was doing all the things, and there was that big event that happened, I think, in the Marriott Center, and only the youth were invited except for the youth leaders and special guests. Well, we got invited, and this Marriott Center holds thousands of people, and we're sitting up in these bleachers or seats, and before it got started, they just wanted to introduce, they announced that there were descendants of Joseph and Emma Smith in the audience, and they wanted to stand up and have us be recognized. And I'm going to cry because I always do when I tell this. And so we stood up, and then everyone else started applauding, and it started like this applaud, and then it just grew into this roar. And I was just in tears because I was still new to the whole magnitude of who he was and what he did. And I still had it fresh in my mind that we were hated in Utah. And, I had no idea there was that much love for my second great grandfather. And it was this roar that just resonated, and all of us were crying. It was amazing. And I think that was so good for the other non-member descendants to experience, because it took down some of those barriers. And so this letter for this next reunion was like the next step of trying to bridge that gap. So
that is a beautiful story. And I guess I relate a little more to the Brigham Young Association. I mean, the Brigham Young descendants, where it's like, why do you hate us? What, like we would, having grown up in Utah, I would have had no idea that Joseph Smith's descendants felt like we hated them and felt this hatred toward, like we are just ignorant. And so, but that doesn't mean that we're, I was going to say innocent. That doesn't mean that we don't have any responsibility. You know what I mean? Right. I think that this, like learning, this is why. It's kind of that idea of like privilege. Like when you have privilege, you don't have to be aware of someone else's pain, and so it is important for us to see, like go, I see that. I want to say, I'm so sorry, but I guess Mary Ellen didn't feel like she could say that. So she did it a different way. So yes, go ahead and share it with us.
Well, it's interesting that I have people that come up to me after firesides that had ancestors that were members of the mob, and they're just in tears, and they come up and they apologize. They apologize for their ancestors, and I'm like, I always say to them, you don't have to apologize to me. I said, this had nothing to do with you. And they're like, I know, but they're just so torn apart that their ancestor was part of the mob. And I said, your ancestors probably reacted to the society of their day and to false beliefs that they had been brought up with or taught against, and they had a fear of this man, and that's the way they reacted. And they're on the other side now, and they've been forgiven for it. And they've reconciled it. I said, they're okay. They're all okay. They're all okay. And it breaks my heart when people come up to me and they're in such agony over it. And I just wish people would understand you. The people who are on the other side that lived in those times, I think their hearts are breaking, because I see us so divided over these things that we didn't live. They did. This was their experience. And they just want the hearts to mend. They just want us all to be united. And with that, I'm going to read this letter. I love it. The way it's worded is beautiful. So this is from the Brigham Young Family Association, June 9th, 2007. For a century and a half, we have grieved over the loss of the fellowship of our dear Emma Hale Smith, her children, and her descendants. We feel in our hearts an abiding longing to join once again these two families in a common celebration of their ancestors, two men who loved each other and gave their lives together in the service of the Lord Jesus Christ. The prophet Joseph Smith, who stands at the head of this dispensation, is second only in our affections to the Lord himself, And we hold in the highest esteem our progenitor, Brigham Young, whose dying words in this world were the repeated name of his greatest friend and mentor, Joseph. If there are any misunderstandings that continue to exist in the lexicon of traditions in our family concerning the prophet's beloved wife, whom we revere as a truly great and saintly lady, we would commit ourselves to do whatever is needed to publish to the world our deep regard for her noble life. It would be our earnest desire to rebuild that bridge of friendship between our two families that existed not so long ago. So then it's signed by all the board members. Yeah.
That is beautiful. That, and the letter, that the article you sent me about it said that she felt like it was all inspired. Those were not her words.
Yeah, and so I talked about the Kirtland dedicatory prayer, and D&C 109:68 says, "O Lord, remember thy servant Joseph Smith Jr. and all his afflictions and persecutions, how he has covenanted with Jehovah and vowed to thee, Almighty God of Jacob, and the commandments which thou hast given him, and that he hath sincerely striven to do thy will. Have mercy, O Lord, upon his wife and children, that they may be exalted in thy presence and preserved by thy fostering hand. Have mercy upon all of their immediate connections, that their prejudices might be broken up and swept away as with a flood, and that they may be converted and redeemed with Israel and know that thou art God." So 70 talks about all their immediate connections, and I looked that up, and it's family. And it's talking about the prejudices being broken up and swept away as a flood. And that letter of reconciliation to us as a family is one of the answers of that prayer. And ever since then, there's been this movement to try to get rid of the prejudices that have been passed down. So yeah.
That is beautiful. That, and I have so many thoughts. One is, I know that some people might feel like it doesn't go far enough because but understanding that there are people in the Brigham Young Association who still have these negative feelings toward Emma, and they're like she was walking this tightrope, or the Lord through her was trying to make it something that could be accepted on both sides.
Yeah.
And it would start this healing. I'm just amazed how the Lord in the Kirtland dedicatory prayer knew what was going to happen, of course, and was speaking to it already, like that statement seems to have more impact today even than it had in Joseph's own day.
Yeah, it does. And I believe that there are many of us that have been sent here to try to help in that effort. I know I have that close-knit connection with Joseph, and I feel when I hear things that are going on and causing discord, I've got that natural feeling of wanting to go in and help. But from my mother's line as well, she had the pure love of Christ like no one I knew, and I have that in me. I just want everyone to get along, and I want everybody to be in the same company with Christ. When he comes and when we go to the other side, I want us all to be together and be happy and have that fullness of joy. And we can't accomplish that when there's this division and discord going on. And that kind of leads me to, I think it's John 20 in the Bible, where it says, "Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar." And I love that because it's pretty plain. It's pretty plain language. And we might have people that say, "Well, we don't hate Brigham Young." And they may not think they hate Brigham Young, but like I said before, we're measured on our words and action by God to one another. And if we're saying things, I've seen some pretty strong language in some of these posts, like calling him a son of perdition and just this really, really ugly stuff. And if you're putting stuff out there that's going to prompt others to have bad feelings to someone else, that's a problem. So like I said, I don't have a problem with people researching. I love that. I love researching and looking into the mysteries that aren't completely solved and 100% out there. But there again, we have to be careful of the language that we use when we bump into troubling things, and how we we're putting things out there because we're forming the thoughts in people's minds about other people. And, we have to be careful with that.
Okay, that is so beautiful. So I think we talked about this a little bit in our previous conversation, but I do still want to ask you again, the fine line, the tightrope, right? Because on the one hand, one thing that I don't like is when we kind of whitewash history or minimize or say, don't talk about that because it might reflect badly. Like I really care about digging out the truth. And so this fine line between, because some people might hear what you're saying as like, don't talk about those things. And I don't think that's what you're saying. Like just, again, just don't be accusing and angry.
Condemning.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
and resentful.
Talk about the tightrope. It used to be like when I was young in the church, members of the church would say, don't even look at it. Don't even go there. Don't even look at it. And I understand that, but there's also danger in it. And there has to be a balance in everything that we do, including this. And now it isn't as easy as saying, don't go there, don't look at that, because with social media the way it is now, even if you try to avoid things, it's going to get thrown in your face. It's going to get thrown. You're going to be exposed to it somehow. So you need to know how to handle it. And so for me, the way I handled it was, I talked about my spiritual side, my historian side. Well, whenever my historian side was like, I got to know, I want to know what this is about, I made sure I took the spiritual side with me. And I always prayed about it. And I always, whenever I'd read something and I could tell it was someone else's perspective, I would just read it and go, okay, and I would just be careful not to, like I said, you have to process the things, but you also that process has to be an effort in trying to put it behind you and saying, well, there were a lot of times when I said, I've read the actions of some of the peoples of the past. And I said, well, that was unfortunate that they said this way and caused this problem. And I just kind of prayed about it and was forgiving. If it bothered me, I was just forgiving about it and said, they know better now. They're on the other side. And I'm doing myself more harm if I'm dredging it up and using it to cause some kind of movement against this person. So
this person that's passed.
Yeah, whichever person we're talking about, because there's several individuals that get discussed a lot. And that's how
it's so important to put ourselves in their shoes. Like even Jordan Peterson talks about like the perpetrators of the Holocaust, right? And instead of reading history and thinking those evil people, how is that? It's better to put ourselves in their shoes so we can understand how people did those things, right? That's how it's useful to us. And then also when you said something about, oh, it's unfortunate that they said that way and caused that problem, or they did, I'm like, I can think that of myself so often. Oh, I wish I hadn't said that way and caused that problem. Yeah. And so the compassion, like it is good to go, okay, let me put myself in. I'm not going to say it's okay what they did. I'm not going to whitewash it, but I am going to try to see how they got there so I can learn valuable lessons from it. And because we can, like truth and love, like we talked about, always have to go together, right? And so it's like those, and sometimes it's a challenge to blend them, but I think that's what God does and what we're called to do. You were
sure, and let me give you an example of how some of those things, when I was doing research, how I saw some of these. When we're sitting here looking at all this from our point of view, we're able to see, oh man, if they just wouldn't have done that, oh, why didn't they just do this? And my great-grandfather, Alexander Hell Smith, went on one of the wagons out west in 1860, incognito. Nobody knew at first that he was a son of Joseph. And he was able to observe a lot that shocked him, one of which was, I don't want to say it was all bad, it was an amazing journey, and he wrote the whole thing down. It's quite an amazing read, but he talks about the level of adultery that's going on in the camps and stuff like that. He mentioned it to one of one of the men there, and he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Once we get to Utah, we'll get rebaptized anyway." And he was horrified by this. And of course, his thought process is, it goes straight to Brigham Young, that Brigham Young, how could he allow this to happen? Da, 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 da. So this gets piled on Brigham Young's shoulder, and he's not even there. But I'm looking at it, I'm going, wait a minute. I know European history. And many of these people were converts, Catholics. And I'm not downing the Catholic Church, but I've had a lot of friends who were friends of mine who were members of that church in high school, and I would always hear the same thing. It doesn't matter what we do on the weekend, we'll go to confession. That was their thought process. So these were the kind of people that was on this wagon train. It was that same thought process. It doesn't matter. We're going to get rebaptized when we get there. Well, that's how they thought, So to me,
passed down from the paying the indulgences and going like that mindset.
Yeah,
I can be forgiven, so I can do it.
But it kind of, a lot of my family knew about this manuscript that and his journals that Alexander had wrote. But the buzz was that Brigham allowed those things to happen. And I read it with an open mind and with my knowledge of European history and of histories of religions and things like that. I was like, no, that's not what's going on. These are a lot of these are Church of England or Catholic people who've not been in the States very long, and that's part of their culture. So do you see how things can be things can be twisted like that? And that's why I said you have to be careful. We don't always have all the information. I just found out yesterday that the books The Kingdom of Nauvoo and Rough Stone Rolling are going to have to be rewritten because there's been new information come out from the community of Christ that they've discovered that proves that we have a misperception of how Nauvoo was first settled. And it's such a huge shift that they're going to have to go back and rewrite parts of their books because of this. And I haven't seen that podcast yet because it's just fresh. It was just like a trailer type thing. But he was going to be interviewing people from the community of Christ about it. So there again, it told me we don't have all the information that could
absolutely
go this way or that way. And there again, that's why we have to be really careful. But
so I have to ask, where did he write that? Where can we get that book?
It was compiled by his daughter. It's so amazing. I think if you type in biography of Alexander Hale Smith, you can order it online through the Community of Christ bookstore.
Okay. That's really fun to hear. So, so is there anything else you want to share on that topic of reconciliation and, this is a gorgeous story of reconciliation. It's really beautiful. It reminds me a little bit of what is trying to be done with the victims, the families of the Mountain Meadows massacre, right? We're trying to make things right, to bring peace and unity, which I think is a beautiful thing. I do think that's what our ancestors are wanting, on both sides.
Yeah.
And ultimately God, our ultimate ancestor, that is definitely what God is wanting. Resentment doesn't serve any of us, or neither does defensiveness, right? A refusal to apologize.
I think it must be like sitting in a movie theater on the other side and watching this movie unfold. Have you ever been in a movie and you're just sitting in the theater going, no, don't do that. Why did you do that? I have to think they must be over there thinking that sometimes, and they know what's coming. They know what's coming for us, and I'm the same way. I don't know what's coming, but I'm aware. I think 2024 is going to be bringing a lot of things our way, and we need to be so spiritually prepared for that, and not so divided on, when you look at issues that people have with Brigham Young or with Emma, when it comes to what is coming up in our future, none of that really matters in the scheme of things. It doesn't. We need to find a way to just forgive those feelings and just let them go, because we need to be prepared for what's coming, and we need to have our hearts united. we're not going to be able to stand up to what's coming our way if we're so split apart in so many ways.
The division does not serve us well.
The division impacts our spirit, and anything that impacts our spirit is going to lessen the strength that it gives us. And so that's why I'm such an advocate of people for them to while they're researching these truths, they feel like they need to just do it in a balanced spiritual way, so that's not turning into a vendetta or an agenda of starting up a movement against somebody, because it's all in the scriptures how we're supposed to treat one another. It's there.
And I just have to once again speak to disagreeing is not division. Having different perspectives is not the same thing as division.
Right.
Or it's not like either we have contention or we all agree. That's not it at all. God intentionally made us all different. We all have different perspectives. We all have different information. Most divisions grow out of misunderstandings, right?
Yes.
And I think being able to talk to someone with whom we disagree is a beautiful thing. The goal shouldn't, like the Smith family descendants being willing to come out as soon as, I love that my people are willing to just love them and embrace them instead of trying to baptize them and thinking that's the only reason to engage with them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't have to make people agree with us in order to be united with them in beautiful ways. And I want that message.
Yeah, I think that if we find ways to come together in love, then the Lord takes over from there. He converts people's hearts. We don't. I think our examples to people is what helps. Like, if you have a fullness of joy, no matter what faith you're in, and you live that to an extent, I think people are drawn to that fullness of joy, and they want to know, hey, where did you get that? And we have had several descendants join after going to the reunions, and then we've had some that are just happy in their own faith. And I'm someone of, if you're where the Spirit has led you, that's where you belong right now. And we all need to respect that and just get along. We're all going to be coming under the Lord together, under Him, under one umbrella. So our challenge is to get along, love one another, and treat each other right. That's that second commandment we've got to master.
That's so beautiful. I love it. Okay. So I have a couple of things now that I had wanted to ask you about, if that's all right. And
sure.
So on this topic of being able, like, your message of unity is exquisite and so important. And yet you joined the church believing several things, believing that polygamy was wrong. It was the P word, right? Like, extremely wrong. And believing that your ancestors, that Joseph and Emma were not polygamists, that Joseph was not a polygamist.
Right.
And it sounds to me like you have never budged on that. Like you still believe that. I kind of wanted to know, part of what you wrote in your message that was beautiful is why you believe that Joseph wasn't a polygamist. I would love it if you would kind of spell out your pathway in that belief. Yeah, and then how did you come to that belief? Why do you hold that belief? How do you articulate it?
Why I don't think he did practice it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's just something, I don't know if I mentioned about the connection I feel in my heart to him.
Mm-hmm.
In our talk before in the other Zoom, but there is a connection that ancestors share. And it's been scientifically proven that experiences and emotions are carried down through the DNA, and you might be drawn to specific ancestors, and then some you may not be. You just feel like you connect with certain ones, and I've always felt like I connected with both Joseph and Emma, but in a very strong manner, Joseph. So it was kind of like, anytime I heard certain comments, it would just, in my heart, it would just like, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. And
So you
I
just
never felt,
knew you had a deep,
I
deep
just knew,
epigenetic and spiritual knowing
yeah,
to start with.
it just didn't feel right. And, you know, years down the road, sometime maybe someone will have something that proves 100% I'm wrong. And if that's so, I'm just going to go, oh, okay. So I was wrong. It's not going to cause me to be angry or anything like that. But that is how I've always felt. And then there's, you know, in later years, there were certain things like the DNA study that was done.
Yeah.
But,
And right before we get to that, because I do want to really focus on that, but you also said like Joseph's words, like the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, Section 101. I like that you believe Joseph to be truthful, right? And so all of his
yeah,
actions and words
yeah.
ring true to you.
Are you talking about the 1843 DNC?
Uh-huh.
The edition
Yeah.
where the definition of marriage was one man, only one man and one woman. And it didn't clarify or say that there was any other options there. That was the definition of marriage was right there. And that came out in 1843. And I was like, well, then, you know, what changed and
I
when
think
did
it was
it?
1835. I think that was the 1835 and then reprinted in 1844. At least that's my understanding. But anyway, in any case, we're
Okay.
talking about the same
It's the same.
Section
This is the
101.
one I saw was the 1843 edition. So,
Uh-huh.
um,
Okay.
and then it was his own newspaper that he had printed as editor that he published that he denied practicing polygamy. And I was like, well, it's his own newspaper. You know, he's the editor of it, and he had it put in there.
Yeah.
Well, there were just those things that kind of bolstered the way I felt already.
Okay.
But it didn't make me want to go out and try and figure out, well, what happened, because here's another thing. Here's something I experienced. My dad was used for the study of the DNA that was done on Josephine Lyons because I think it was her mom that told her that she was Joseph's daughter. It was really hard to do that DNA because it was mitochondrial, so it was hard to prove because it was mitochondrial DNA. But if they had,
because it was a female descendant,
yeah,
right? So that's what
yeah,
they needed, new technology. Okay.
yeah, they were able to, like, they needed male descendants, straight line male descendants from Joseph. And my dad was a great grandson. He's still alive? Great grandson of Joseph, male to male, just 3 generations down. So with that, they were able to build a better DNA copy of, if I remember reading right, they were able to completely get Joseph's DNA and construct it where they could do these. I'm probably not wording this right, but do this study. And they were able to prove that she wasn't. And I was like, okay, so did her mother lie? And as soon as I said it, as soon as I put that out of my mouth, the spirit was like, no, because her children were sealed to him, so she considered them to be his children. They were adopted in that way. I was like, oh, okay, I get that. I understand that.
Okay, that was your understanding. Okay.
That was my understanding.
When
I was like, well, maybe that's all the other ones. That's why they said, well, because the women considered them to be Joseph's child now. It wasn't abnormal for them to say, you're his child. You know, how many parents of adopted kids say, no, you're not his child because you're adopted? You know, it's natural to say, no, yeah, you're his child. And so that's the way I began to look at it.
Okay. I love, so, okay. Yeah. So I just found, and I'll be doing a episode on the affidavits at some point, but Sylvia actually never claimed to have been married to Joseph that I've been able to find. She didn't, there's an affidavit filled out for her and she never appeared and never signed it. So the only claim we have of Sylvia is Josephine. And I think it was 1913, filled out an affidavit saying that her mother told her that she was Joseph's child. So it could be so many degrees of, we don't have Sylvia's own words, I guess is what I'm saying. All we have is Josephine's many decades later understanding in this right? So there are so many ways that this could have happened. But the important thing is that we know that Joseph didn't have, Joseph doesn't have children with anybody but Emma.
Yeah.
And that everything keeps pointing that direction.
Right.
I do want to know, so when was your father first approached about DNA? Because they did rule out many descendants, but Josephine Lyon was the last best hope. Many polygamy researchers were certain that she was Joseph's child. I think it came as a shock to a lot of people. Yeah. But they'd already ruled out everybody else. I want to know how your father was approached, how he felt about it, because he would have had all those hard feelings toward the church, toward Brigham Young.
Well, I'm afraid I was the culprit.
Tell us, give us the scoop. Okay.
Yeah, they really needed Dad or another great grandson that had that close male to male connection. And Dad, I kept asking him if he wanted to be involved in the DNA thing, and years went by, and he's like, no. And then here came the Lyons case, and I was like, okay. So I talked to Dad, and I said, hey, Dad, there's this case, and I was telling him about it, and I said, here's your chance to prove Joseph didn't practice polygamy. He said, okay, I'll do it.
So, okay, that's amazing.
So that's what I said.
And then again, that's what you said. But this is what I'm feeling like, Kimberly. Like most of us that are members of the church had no clue that was going on. Really, it wasn't. But you, because of your unique position, having joined the church, being a researcher, being so involved in history and these questions and studying them, were in the position to approach your father and in the way that was, but I guess what I'm thinking is you said they needed that close DNA, a direct line grandson. Yeah. And if your father passed away, we might miss the chance to ever prove to ever answer these questions, solidly, at least for generations until other technology comes about. But I'm just seeing God's hand in this massively, the way God used you to help all of this be answered. Like your father is the reason, or at least a big part of the reason, that we know that Josephine Lyon is not Joseph's descendant or daughter, and that Joseph didn't have children with anyone other than Emma. That's huge. Right.
The Lord also has given me a balanced view of everything. So it might surprise you, but I want to give a plug-in for polygamy about something. And this could be, maybe it wasn't supposed to happen, but since it did, the Lord did something with it. Or maybe it was supposed to happen, and this is what happened as a result. But either way, as a church, we would not have been able to grow our missionary force and reach the four corners of the earth as fast as we did, as fast as we needed to for the times, if that hadn't happened. And that's what I like to look at. It's like everything with the past with me. There's so many things I've seen that to me are horrible, but I process those and get rid of it. And then I look at the good that happened as a result, and I try to magnify on the good and carry that forward and add it to what I'm doing while I'm here. And so for me, I don't have a problem with the fact that polygamy happened, because look what happened as a result. We did reach the four corners of the earth. We did. And in time, for these times that we're at, that happened. And I don't know that other church has been able to do that. So I'm going to push back on you a little bit, because I've thought about this a lot. If you don't mind, we can demonstrate how we can have unity while we have a slight disagreement, right? Yeah. Because I feel like, well, we know that actually the birth rates weren't higher because of polygamy, because polygamous wives have fewer children, and there were many men who couldn't find wives. But I do think, so I compare it to when one of my leaders said, can you point out the good that came from polygamy? I'm like, well, yeah, just like we could point out the good that came from communism or the good that came from slavery. Like God always can, like many of all of us, I'm certain to have somewhere in our ancestry rape. That doesn't mean that since we came from rape, that rape is good or okay. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and so the way I look at it is,
how I've started to process it as I've encountered people from different branches of the restoration and seeing this unity come back, I'm like, God planted seeds everywhere, and God uses everyone. So Brigham bringing the saints west and establishing the church out here and being such a force of nature was very much in service to God. Like, I think that preserved this religion when so many others kind of faded away or got just blended into the culture. It also, Salt Lake being here was instrumental in we got here in 47 and the 49ers going to California, and Utah was a big way station for them, right? And so I can see how God used all of it. But for me, I don't look at that as good fruits of polygamy, because I don't think bad roots bring forth good fruits necessarily. I can see that God works through all of it, right? God can bring beauty through all of it. So for me, I don't want to give polygamy credit for that. I want to say God worked through people despite polygamy. Polygamy didn't ruin. Like I say to people in our church, so many people feel like, well, if that happened, we have this black and white view. If that happened, then the church isn't true and I have to leave. Or people in the church challenge me and say, so you're saying that Brigham Young got this wrong, then how can you claim to be a member of the church? Or, like it has to be all or nothing. Either Brigham Young did everything right, and therefore every church leader did everything right, or the church is somehow invalid. Anyway, so that's how I look at it. I can see God working, but I'm very slow to say, oh, thank heaven for polygamy, so that we, because I think that God cares about people being treated badly. I think God cares about daughters being, like Jacob 2:31 through the end. I don't think God would say, I want this to happen for these ends.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I do appreciate your perspective, and I do appreciate that God, one thing that I say is God used Joseph Smith through for the gifts that Joseph had as a revelator, as a people person, gathering people, bringing a seer, bringing forth the Book of Mormon, bringing forth revelation, bringing forth beautiful doctrine. But Joseph was not blessed and did not have really a business mind, right? He didn't succeed in the Kirtland Safety Society or the Steamboat or the store or but God still could use him. And then I think Brigham Young was this force of nature to bring the people west, and God could use him that way. But I think just like Joseph didn't really succeed in business, Brigham did not succeed in doctrine. And every doctrinal innovation that Brigham brought forward or taught, we have very thankfully discarded and usually condemned, right? And so that's how I look at it. But I spoke for a little while, so go ahead and respond.
No, I guess my only response is regardless of what happened, it happened the way it happened. And I think when you're looking at it in the scheme of God and how he watches us, these were all experiences that we've had to go through and our ancestors had to go through. And they were also tests for all of us. It's everything we go through is a test on how do we handle this? How do we process this? How are we going to be towards one another concerning this? Are we going to divide up and fight like they have in the Middle East for thousands of years over stuff happened thousands of years ago? Or are we going to come to terms with it and come to peace with it? And for some, coming to terms with it and coming to peace with it is they need to know every little thing that happened, And that's why I say I don't have a problem with people doing that. If they feel like they need to know, I don't have a problem with that at all. It boils down to how are you going to use that? And can you use it as a healing process rather than a dividing process? And, what is going to be the result from that? Because we have to process all these things in the here and now and today. And like I said, to prepare for what's coming. And so for me, that's why people get so floored when I say, it really doesn't matter to me to know these things, because these are really heavy things, and we have a lot of heavy things we're given by the Lord. So I pick and choose which heavy thing I want to carry, and that just isn't one of them. And so I have my opinions, like I tell you sometimes, and then you can, like you said, you can push back, and that's fine. I love pushbacks. Pushbacks are something we can learn from. So you gave me a perspective I really hadn't thought about before. And that's good. That's a good thing. This is us agreeing to disagree agreeably, or I might agree with some of the things that you say. The important thing is we can talk about it, and I will go on with my day without having any feelings of, how dare she say that?
Right.
Yeah. How I will have no feelings of offense at all, because we're talking about history and times, and we're talking about relationships and the spirit, and we're talking about how do we handle these things, what do we do with this. We're trying to reason this out, is what we're trying to do, and we're trying to help other people reason these things out in a balanced way so that they can maintain their testimonies yet understand their past and come to terms with it. We're trying to get them to see that those people on the other side who live this are brokenhearted watching all this happen, and that we just, people just need to find a way to get that balanced way of trying to process this, and so that's the beauty of what you and I are doing today, and the kind of friendship that we have, albeit a new friendship. It's friendship, and this is how I feel like the Lord wants us to be. It's okay to communicate about things that are sensitive amongst a lot of people. It's okay to communicate about these things. It's just how we do it, how we talk to one another, how we think about one another. Even our very thoughts are measured by God. So we need to go back to the scriptures and read again and study again how we are supposed to treat one another, even in difficult times. What are we supposed to do with that? Use the Lord as a guidance counselor for that, and measure everything that you're going to say before it comes out of your mouth, and ask yourself, is this going to cause hurt and pain or a problem to somebody? Like calling somebody a son of perdition, that's strong. Regardless of how bad you might think of a person, that they've done something, that's not your call to make. You're not their judge. So saying, man, I really don't like what he did. Like, that was so beyond wrong what this person did. That's okay. But calling them evil and a son of perdition, you're making yourself a judge over that person. So we just have to be careful.
That's such good guidance. I love that you keep talking about our ancestors. And I just had the thought, like, I really don't think our ancestors on the other side are going, yes, go get him. Now say that. Now, you know what I mean? Like,
no, they're in those movie theater seats going, oh, that was yours.
Yeah.
Your descendant, not mine.
Right. And so one last thing, because I know, it can be so challenging. I love your guidance, and I'm recommitted to trying I'm certain that this is what you're talking about is what is in my heart, what I want to do. But I'm certain that if I went back and look over everything I've said, there would be things that I'm like, I could have done that better. So
me too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the challenge can be, I just am thinking of, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And I just this week was reading people saying things that I've said that I have never, like people who are so, I think that they think Brigham Young is up there going, yeah, go get her, and saying all of these things to people that are just not true. I always am like, hey, just reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you my perspective. You don't have to hear it from what someone claims, what someone says about me dishonestly, and then go repeat that. People keep repeating things. And so I'm
That's how we
trying
got in this
to,
boat in the same first place. That's how we got where we are right now, because somebody said something, put a spin on it, and generations later, you've got all this stuff. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so what is the way to respond? Because I try to just say, no, I never said that. And you're bearing false witness, like that's not true. And I'm happy to say what I said. And then at some points I'll try to use some humor, but or I most often just don't engage.
Yeah.
But because this happened to Jesus, this happened to Joseph Smith, and this happens to all of us in life. I feel like with what I'm trying to do, I'm a good target for people who want to do this. What is the best way to respond? Because it's so especially when they come into your space and try to contact your leaders and try to, and try to reach out. Like, I know people whose families and loved ones have been told these lies about them, and it can create real divisions when people lie about someone and then someone believes it instead of just approaching the person. So I'd love to just have you counsel what you think is the way to respond.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to get some comments with some nice spins from this broadcast. And I had a friend last night that said, aren't you afraid of the posts and the comments? And I'm just like, no, I'm not afraid of it. And because I honestly don't get offended. And there's something I learned years ago in Nauvoo. If you've ever been to the Nauvoo pageant, they have the protesters who come in just like they do at General Conference. And you have the screamers and the yellers. And I was up in front of Zion's Mercantile walking down the sidewalk, and there's this guy who's pacing up and down the sidewalk, and he was behind me coming my way. And he was one of the ones that would yell at even the little kids, and he'd scare the kids. It was horrible. And he started getting to Joseph Smith was this, he was a pedophile, he was this, and it was at my back. It was just at my back. And I kept walking, but just tears were just going down my face because I was like, look how this is affecting me. Look how this is affecting me. What must it have been like for him? And just in that moment, I was like, but he endured it, and he saw everything to the end. And if he could endure it, then I can. And it's the same with the Savior. If he can endure what he did on the cross, then I can handle this. And so I do, when I try, I don't often post on some of the Facebook pages about these topics, but every now and then someone will say something that's a little out of context about Joseph or Emma, and I'll pop on. I'll say, well, it's not exactly how it was. And then they'll come back and want to debate with me. And I'm just, after a while, like after a few back and forths, I'll start getting this feeling like he's sucking my energy away, and it's starting to feel heavy. And I'll just end it with, I've kind of said what I said, and I wish you luck. I wish you blessings from God. I'll end it off with thanks. I can't debate about this. This. I wish you a blessed life, and just leave it at that. Yeah, it's hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just do your best to. That's what I kind of am like. I'll just if people want to believe those things, there's nothing I can do about it. People believed horrible things about Joseph Smith, and he try as he might, they continued to say it, they continued to believe it.
Yeah.
But I guess he just did his best to be who he was.
Yeah. And they're going to be out there, no matter how clear you make it and how full of truth it is. There are going to be those who will want to contend. And, you can always be Southern. I'm from the South, and you just say, bless your heart. And they don't know what that means. It sounds nice, but it's not.
I have heard, people have informed me about that one. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll just say that to myself. Bless her heart.
Well, bless their hearts.
That's great. Well, my goodness, thank you for jumping back on. I know we might have repeated a little bit of what we said, but I thought it was all valuable.
Yeah.
Did you have something else that you were going to say? Did we?
I think we covered
think
it
I
all
covered
this time.
Okay. Okay. Well, if the Lord wakes you up in the middle of the night again, let me know. And we'll see
All right.
if we need to jump back on. But again, thank you so much. And I look forward to a continued friendship. I've thoroughly enjoyed
Absolutely.
my time getting to know you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
me too.
Have a great day, everybody. Another huge thank you to Kimberly for sharing herself with us. That was beautiful. I will keep you updated about any exciting things we are able to arrange. And a huge thank you to each of you who are walking this path with me and engaged in this journey of seeking truth in a spirit of love and just a desire to serve God. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.